There, but not there. Good morning, everyone. All right. So, who had a good time at the happy hour last night? Yeah, that was pretty cool. Detached Retina, what'd you think of the band? They were pretty good. They were pretty good. I was definitely impressed. It's a corporate band. It's the Excella House Band. How many of you work at a place where you have a house band? Yeah. Do you work at Excella? Oh, at Capital One. Capital One has a house band also. 2 house bands. We could have had a battle. I know what's going to happen next year. It's awesome. Awesome. So welcome back to day 2. Those of you that had the most fun at the happy hour aren't here yet. It was a really good time. We've got another great lineup today with more keynotes, more Ignite talks, and then, of course, more open spaces. I wanted to talk a little bit this morning, just for a minute, about some thoughts that I have on DevOpsDays events and why we choose the format and why we have the format of these events that we do have. And I'll start just by sharing a story that of a conversation I had earlier this week with one of my co-organizers. And the question was, if we're going to continue to grow this thing, can we continue the same format? And more specifically, we do a single track. In the morning, everyone goes to the same keynotes. Should we split that up into 2 tracks? If we split it up, then we don't need as big a room. We need maybe 2 rooms this size. We could double the size of the conference. It feels like that would be a good thing. And as we talked about it, I said, listen, we're here in DC. So if we're going to split the talks into 2 different tracks, how are we going to decide which talk goes into which track? Well, it's DevOps, so we could put all the dev talks in one track and ops in the other track. Like, that doesn't work. It's DC, we could put all the public sector talks in one track and all the private sector talks in another track. That doesn't work. And we definitely came down to this agreement that the beauty of the single track is not that everyone has the same experience, but everyone sits through the same content. And by sits through, I mean gets to listen to and partake in. But the beauty of the single track, or sort of the downfall of the multi-track conference, is when you go to the multi-track conference, you look for the talks that you identify with. You go to the talks where you're going to feel comfortable. And in a multi-track, or in a single track, you don't have that choice. You go to the talks that the committee has put together for you, or you go to no talk at all at that time. And our hope is that when you come in, it maybe wasn't a talk you would have selected had it been a multi-track conference, but you'll have some new insights. You'll be provoked to a new way of thinking. You'll learn something new that you wouldn't have otherwise explored. And from that, you'll become a better person. You'll have a richer conference experience. But not only that, then you have that same experience that everyone else in the room has had, and you can talk about those things. I hate going to multi-track conferences where I go up and I meet someone new and I want to talk about, wasn't that presentation amazing? And they were in the other room. So we can't have that conversation. So I think it leads to much better conversations. The other thing, sometimes people argue, well, the single track, now I'm a prisoner. I have to sit through those talks. But we combat that through the open spaces. In the afternoon, the conference is yours. You get to talk about the things that you want to talk about. And one thing that I saw, or one thing that I said yesterday, and I'm not sure how much it happened, but we do have a set number of spaces, a set number of times for those open space discussions. But if the talk or the topic that you posted didn't get selected, find the humans that want to talk about that thing. You can go anywhere. The beauty of the open spaces and the beauty of this facility is that it is, in fact, pretty open. You can have a conversation under the stairwell if you need to. So I really hope that yesterday was enlightening, thought-provoking, got you thinking about new things, new ways of working. And I hope more than that you met some people yesterday. We are a community of people that are practicing DevOps. Each and every one of us is at a different point in our journey on DevOps. We can all learn from each other, whether that's, I'm going to help you move along this journey because maybe I'm further advanced, or I'm going to remind you what it was like when we did everything waterfall. And you can help me come along. And by helping me come along, you're going to get better yourself. You're going to learn more and have new insights. So I really encourage you today to find and meet at least 2 new people while you're here. These, again, are people that are local to you. These are people that one day in the future you might work with. One day you might meet again at a meetup. Heck, you might just make an appointment to have coffee a month out, or make an appointment to join them at lunch at their office. I've done this at many places that I've worked. We'll just invite people in at lunch. Let's sit around and talk about tech. Let's talk about the challenges you're having, the challenges we're having, how we're addressing them, how we're fighting those. What are the things that we're seeing that are successful? Share that. DevOps really is about sharing. So how do we share that information with the rest of our community? So thank you for coming back to day 2. A couple of quick notes here. Just a reminder that we have the Etherpad set up. That's at e.devopsdaysdc.org. You can take notes throughout the day there. In addition to just taking notes about the open spaces, you're welcome to create a pad for each one of the keynotes and jot down some notes there if you like. There are, on that, there is a page for job listings if you're hiring or looking for folks. There's also a page where you can put in your own resume or your LinkedIn profile if you're looking for work. So this morning we have a couple of keynotes. So we have 4 different keynotes this morning. Then we have 6 Ignites, and then 3 more rounds of open spaces. And then we'll close out the day with a recording of the, not the Food Fight Show, the DevOps Days podcast. And I really would like, so if you've never listened to the Food Fight Show or some of these podcasts, the way that the podcast is going to work, it's essentially a panel discussion. We'll do it with an audience, but I would really love to have you as the audience members participate in our panel discussion. And the questions that we'll ask, and you can start to think about these now so you'll have words to say then. Like, what have you learned? What was your experience like over DevOps Days? Same sort of questions that I asked yesterday. What surprised you about your experience here? Those of you that are first-time DevOps Days attendees, having your voice on that podcast is going to be very important. We had that question yesterday morning or yesterday afternoon. How do I get my coworkers excited about this? How do I get them to come to these things? Well, let's capture how your experience was so that we can get more people to these things, get more people thinking in these ways. Those of you that were at DevOps Days DC last year and are back this year, we'd love to hear stories of things that you've tried in the ensuing year. What have you taken back to work? What things did you try that worked? What things did you try that failed? And let's talk about some of those. So there's some really, I know there's rich content here in the room, and I'm telling you, your story is worth sharing. So I would really love it if you'd join us on that podcast this evening, or this afternoon. Okay, so let's get into our first talk, and that's going to be from Mike Bland. And one of the most amazing things that I learned about Mike Bland last night is dude can rock a guitar. He was the only one, I think, of us that said, oh, there's a band? I think I'm just going to step in. Can I borrow an axe? And he did that, and he rocked it for 2 songs. It was really incredible. So a warm round of applause for Mike Bland.
All right, can you all hear me all right? Microphone's on? All right, fasten your seatbelts. So you may remember back in October 2013, healthcare.gov crushed under the load, which, you know, it's great. People want this service, but healthcare reform is in danger of failing because of a website. I mean, when you think about all the talent and success of the US tech industry, how is this even possible? Well, fortunately, a month later, they finally opened the doors to bring in experts from industry to lead the recovery effort so that by the end of the following April, not only had enrollment reached the revised target of 6 million and the original of 7, but cumulatively they had 8 million people enrolled in healthcare through healthcare.gov. So this recovery was a roaring success thanks to just an instantaneous dramatic change in the tech culture. And it was a triumph for DevOps principles. You had a small, integrated team turn around a troubled project that was years and hundreds of millions of dollars in the making. Technology was never the problem. It was that culture of waterfall-style contracts that was in place. It just kind of assumed that you put requirements in, you get quality out. So once the administration decided to fix the problem rather than adhere to decades of conventional wisdom around waterfall-style contracting, it fixed the real problem. But then, what's next? How did it happen in the first place, and how can you make sure this problem doesn't happen again? How can the momentum of that recovery effort actually lend some more momentum to other IT reform efforts throughout the government. And then how did I get wrapped up in this? So just go in my background a little bit. I left Google and the tech industry back in September 2011 and decided I want to go back to music school. I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston. And after about 4 semesters, a buddy of mine found me on LinkedIn, Jason Huggins, and he sent me this email. He's like, as you may or may not be aware, I helped late last year with the healthcare.gov website rescue. It's going to take a while before the government gets good at software development and testing, and they're going to need a culture change. The White House gets it now that fundamental change is needed in how they create and test software, and more importantly, that change imposed top-down is likely to fail. Again, no pressure. I respect your desire to focus on other things, but there's this whole your country needs you thing. So I figured I'd just put that out there for you to think about. And so, I grew up in Hampton, Virginia, about 2.5 hours away. Big military town. So without realizing it, he hit my big red button. I dropped out of Berkeley, and I ended up joining the government in November 2014. I left in March, and I'm about to go back in. So to understand, though, why Jason recruited me, let's talk about when I joined Google in 2005. And of course, it was already a wildly successful company. Everybody wanted to work there. We had to be doing a lot of things right, and we were. But there was a side that people couldn't see where we were actually in danger of collapsing under our own success. Because the size and complexity of our code and our products, of course, that exploded with our growth. And we did our best to hire the best and empower them with a supportive environment, but there's no amount of brainy heroics that can eventually overcome the challenges of sheer scale. So we were approaching the point where we risked holding ourselves back, slowing ourselves down, as the fear of change and all the things that might go wrong would eventually have stifled innovation, courage, led to missed opportunities, petty empire building, and irrelevance. And there is no project more visibly susceptible than the Google Web Server team, or I'm going to call it GWS for short. This is the team that's responsible for the google.com homepage. And I wasn't a member of that team, but I was very close with a lot of the people on that team. But you have to understand, GWS was not a glamorous assignment in the beginning. It was basically a dumping ground for all the other teams that had features that they wanted to throw into google.com. Now just imagine if you break google.com, or you're on that team and you allow it to be broken. So now, when search results come back wrong or unacceptably slow, you're not just talking about thousands of queries turning to thousands of unfulfilled promises and losing revenue. You're also talking about losing trust. But at the same time, to a lot of people, things are going great. What's wrong? What's broke? Why fix it? You had some people believing their own hype in that regard, and some like me that were certain that we were about to be outed as the frauds that were accidentally hired, that we actually were. And also, most people at that time, they didn't know how to write tests. They hadn't really had much experience with it, heard much about it. And plus, the tools that we had at the time were really about to break down under the load of all the new people and projects. But by far, the biggest obstacle was we couldn't measure the value derived from avoiding problems ahead of time rather than just fixing them as they came up. Now, of course, in retrospect, we have some pretty big examples of things where automated testing and some other tools and disciplines might have prevented these catastrophic issues. But people kind of underestimate the chances of something like that happening to them, especially when the core of their value system relies on objective measurements. And don't get me wrong, Google's data-driven business practices have been fantastically good for the company and for society. But it did make it extremely difficult to convince people that testing was something they should try. And we couldn't really blame them. Like I said, people didn't have experience with testing outside of the slow and brittle status quo that the tools of the time produced. And plus, everybody was under constant delivery pressure, especially the frauds like me that were about to be discovered. So given our inability to communicate using this language of data that was so important at Google, they couldn't really understand why we thought it was so important those of us who cared about testing, and we couldn't blame them for not trying to test when they couldn't afford the time to learn. We had to find another way. Before I get into some of the specifics, I'm going to talk a little bit about culture change in general. One thing we know is it does not happen like this. There is nothing worse than Cartman with authority. And what I mean to say is like the executives, we were fortunate to have executives that had been at Microsoft, Sun, Bell Labs, Digital, places like these, and they had seen that pattern before where an executive tries to push a good idea and people push against it. It also doesn't happen like this. There's no such thing as a rock star, guru, ninja that's going to come and save the day. And I think these terms are particularly harmful because they kind of ascribe a kind of power and mythology to other humans that, by implication, is beyond the reach of us mere mortals. And I think it's wasteful at best, dangerous at worst, to assume that change is only possible through the magic and charisma of a selected few. I mean, power and mythology are very useful tools, but they require very deliberate cultivation, something that is repeatable at some level, basically a model. You can never do the exact things that people did in a different situation, but you can use their stories to inspire your present course. And I believe the most important part of these stories are the principles behind them that lead to particular processes and technologies. And in this story, I believe the organization should support the people in that organization doing their best work, not just coerce them into merely following orders. In order for that to happen, though, people need to know what the right thing to do is and feel like they have the power to actually do it. So when we started in 2005, as I mentioned, relatively few people knew how to do automated testing. They didn't have any experience informing them of their value, and the tools were becoming slower all the time. We had to make the right thing to do the easy thing to do. And fortunately, even though we were limited in many ways, by virtue of the fact that we were at Google, we did have a lot of advantages. We had access to information. We had tools that facilitated discovery of that information. We were empowered to develop and pursue a vision. We had the freedom to combine forces with like-minded people and pursue a common goal. And we didn't realize it at the time, but we were actually following a very common model described by Jeffrey Moore in his book, Crossing the Chasm. So the core of this is that different people react differently to different forces and stimuli, different methods of persuasion. And if you're not familiar with it, the far left groups, there starts with the innovators and the early adopters. I lump them together and I call them instigators. And then you've got the early majority. They're sympathetic to change, but they need something that's already polished that they could take and use. Late majority is just like, we'll do whatever's popular, and the laggards, they're useless, forget about them. But getting the right messaging to the right people in the right order is key. And crossing the chasm in between the instigators and the early majority is what will make or break an initiative. And we'll see this little bridge that I've stuck in there, what that's made of. But first, let's go back to GWIS. So the tech lead of the team at the time, Bart Metarata, he believed automated testing would go a long way towards curing these ills of complexity and fragility. So the team took a really hard line. There would be no more changes accepted into GWIS without accompanying tests. They set up a continuous build, religiously kept it passing. They had coverage monitoring. They made sure that the coverage went up over time. And they wrote a policy and a testing guide. And they insisted that contributors both within the team and from outside the team adhered to both. So, oh, I didn't mean to click. Anyways, but despite the initial unpopularity of this policy, the GWIS team held firm, and they did eventually turn a corner. They became one of the most productive teams in the company. They were integrating a huge number of changes from different teams every week and still maintaining a pretty brisk release cycle. New team members, they'd show up, they'd be productive very quickly because there was all kinds of good test coverage, code health, good practices in place. And ultimately, this radical policy enabled the Google.com homepage to expand its capabilities and rapidly thrive in an sorry, so much stuff here, in an amazingly fast-moving and competitive technology landscape. And it goes without saying that GWIS was a model of automated testing effectiveness, but it was actually still just one small team in a big and growing company. So we had to amplify its message somehow and build that bridge across the chasm. So Bart partnered with another friend of mine, Nick Lasecki, to form the testing grouplet. And grouplets are what Mark mentioned yesterday is like X teams. People with 20% time that said, hey, we're going to form a team out of this and do something good for the company. And I eventually succeeded them as one of the leads of the grouplet when they stepped down. But we had very little budget, zero authority, but we did have all that freedom to experiment in very creative ways to attack the problem from different angles. And we worked very closely with NGDU, which is the in-house training organization. We would produce training materials. We had a weekly new hire lecture and lab that we'd volunteer for. And of course, there were tech talks, both internal, external. And we worked really closely with the tools teams to start reducing that friction that caused people to say, I don't have time to test. The biggest breakthrough, however, a thing called testing on the toilet. So this is a flyer we put up every week in practically every bathroom throughout the company, throughout the world. And we were able to gradually raise the level of testing awareness and sophistication throughout the company. And I chose this episode not just because I wrote it by chance, but it also encapsulates two other big important testing grouplet missions. One was Test Certified, which was basically a roadmap designed to do two things. Number one, hack the culture, because, hey, we've got tasks, we've got levels, we've got a ladder, you can see who else is on it. So we kind of played into that data-driven competitive facet of the culture. And also, we gave people a way to overcome that first scary obstacle of, well, how do I get started? And at the same time, when teams would join the program, we had volunteers that would be assigned as mentors to these projects, and they'd kind of help coach them through their issues and validate their progress up the ladder. And it eventually, we realized a couple years in, hey, this could be the big strategy for the grouplet. Get the whole company to Test Certified Level 3, whether or not they actually sign up for the program. Just make sure everybody's operating at that level. And to help with that as well, we had the Test Mercenaries, sort of like an internal consulting group, which I also became a member of. And so we would actually go into teams for a few months at a time and apply all of our tools and practices to a team's own code. And we would use Test Certified both as a goal to measure progress and a guide. And our close collaboration in the Mercenaries with the tools teams really fueled the innovation that culminated in that tool suite that I'll tell you about, maybe you've heard about, that removed the whole I don't have time to test excuse. And we also did these events, my favorite things, fix-its, these kind of day-long company-wide things. We tried to get everybody behind a particular goal. And these were not mandated by, the executive leadership or anything. We just kind of decided we'll have a fix-it, and we had a fix-it. And so it addressed traditionally these important but not urgent things like, hey, write some tests, or fix your broken tests, or let's move up the test certified ladder. And it also was an extremely powerful and efficient tool for spreading, or mechanism for spreading the new build tools when they were ready, so that practically the whole company at least heard about them, if not adopted them right away. And the urgency of fix-its created this critical massive effort, so that by the time we were finished with the fix-it, we had ratcheted up the state-of-the-art in tools and techniques, and we had drove our culture change mission to a new plateau. But, this did not happen overnight. The success was far from certain, and, it could get pretty dark at times over the 5 years that it took to do this. This is an abridged version of this talk. I won't go into all the details, but I'll show you how all the pieces I've described kind of fit together into the big puzzle. So this model, I call it the Rainbow of Death. It's not its original name. It's from a friend of mine, Albert Wong, another ex-Googler who is now part of the VA digital service. He let me change the name for my purposes. He approves. But it kind of delineates all the different functions that you have to cover in order to migrate from one side of the chasm to the other. And it has a nice linear property, whereas you can see, one end, people are going to be dependent on the experts to do things, but once you get to the other, people are empowered to do things on their own. So a lot of these things that I'm flashing up here, I'm just going to go by quickly. I mean, obviously, test certified could be in like 4 of these buckets at least, but for sanity's sake, you get a rough picture of how, even though this was like a random grab bag of, different initiatives that we just kind of threw against the wall, not only did they stick, but in this context, they make sense. All these different pieces, even though they're disjoint, they tend to reinforce one another when you look at the whole arc of what's required to cross the chasm. And then the big bang towards the end, we had the revolution fix it, because I'm a Beatlemaniac, in January 2008, and that rolled out the new tool suite that started taking away the I don't have time to test excuse. And then in March 2010, we had the test automation platform fix it. And the thing about TAP was it was a continuous integration platform, internal, that was built on these new tools. And it was so fast that it could identify exactly what change caused a breakage, report it to you, but by the time you checked the dashboard, like a dozen other people had already noticed, and the original author had either fixed it or rolled it back. So like your job as a build cop was practically nothing most of the time. And so Rachel Potvin from the tools team gave a talk at Scale last year, and she threw some numbers out about the current state of the Google development ecosystem. And she talked about a whole bunch of other tools that comprise it, but she made a point of specifically saying, TAP is our automated test infrastructure, without which this model would completely fall apart. So there's, of course, plenty of room for improvement, but instead of arguing whether or not people should be doing automated testing, the discussion is now around how. The fear is gone. Googlers today can see tangible progress towards exciting new milestones, and they're not held back by chronic outbreaks of high-priority bugs. So after 5 years of grassroots teamwork, we've done the impossible. And that made us mighty. And I love throwing Caravaggio's David and Goliath up here, because if you don't know the background, this is actually a self-portrait of Caravaggio himself as Goliath. There is no outside force resisting us. The technical problems, they were interesting, but they were the relatively easy ones to solve. The real enemy was our own identity and culture. And it took a gradual, years-long effort to overcome this and to get people to genuinely appreciate the challenges we were facing or about to face and how automated testing was important for dealing with them. We had to provide the knowledge and the power necessary to change perceptions and provide experience. Because often the greatest obstacle to change isn't the way, often the greatest obstacle to change we want to see in the world is the way that we ourselves, as individuals, teams, and organizations, already see it. So nowadays, automated testing maybe seems obvious to a lot of us. Of course it's valuable. Of course you would do it. But it's still true. We can't really prove the value of it by upfront calculation. We still can only describe it through like side effects, like Rachel's numbers and anecdotal evidence. But, and pardon me if this sounds a little familiar, how can we be sure anything we do in the course of development provides value, including what features we choose to write? This was in there a month ago, folks. I didn't just spice it up. It's almost impossible to prove the value of a supportive or preventative measure, whether it's automated testing, security review, documentation. And so, in Mark Schwartz's book, he talks about, and he talked about yesterday, how return on investment metrics like these are inherently flawed. They don't really capture the concept of value, because they fail to incorporate many different factors that go into the calculation. And his hypothesis in the book, which I got his approval that I represented him accurately in this paraphrase, but his thesis here is that value is an emergent property that arises from the experience of a team trying to deliver said value. And to provide context for this definition, Mark states that businesses should view themselves as complex adaptive systems which self-organize under leadership's influence. And this is in contrast to the hierarchical command and control, overly bureaucratic systems that are resistant to change. But quickly, let's just recap the very basics of systems thinking. There's an author, Donella Meadows. She wrote a book called Thinking in Systems It talks about how systems are comprised of elements, or in our case, people, interconnections, which would be the relationships between people, and a function or a purpose. And she talks about how the system's behavior is actually determined by the system itself. You can take an identical stimulus, apply it to two different systems, and come up with completely different behaviors and outcomes. And this behavior is sensitive to information flow, to the interconnections and relationships between people. And also, the purpose of the system is a key factor that can potentially change the behavior of the whole thing. The punchline that I want to leave you with is that if you're going to have a system to shape human behavior that doesn't account for human nature, you're setting everybody up for failure. And for me, the key to Google's success wasn't that it had, the smartest people or the most money, the best product, the best food, or parties, or ski trips, or any of that kind of stuff. It did have those. But it created a system that worked with the best tendencies of human nature rather than against them. And the purpose was continued innovation based on the principle that smart, creative people will thrive in an environment that supports them. And they understood that innovation is an emergent property of a properly established system, which brings us to the government. So again, like after healthcare.gov, there's all this momentum. Yeah, let's bring innovation all the way across government IT. And specifically, let's replace all these waterfall-style contracts and processes with something like DevOps that is already taken off in the industry and proven successful. But you got to kind of wonder, like, if everybody says they want innovation, why didn't it happen before October 2013? Well, just quickly, I'm going to look at the same basic obstacles, or the same I'm going to look at the obstacles that I perceive in the government through the same lens that I perceived Google's. And even though the context is different and the details are a little different, the same basic forces of human nature there on the right, they're the same in any organization, whether it's Google, the government, your own company. And in particular in the government, like these processes and obstacles, they're a response to the fear of taking a risk because something might go wrong and you'll be held accountable, and that means getting fired. So there's this culture of fear that needs to be replaced with one of shared effort and shared success. And I think effective knowledge sharing is critical to this effort. And to illustrate this, let me show you what it was like my first day at Google. I felt like I had the world at my fingertips. And I'm not going to go through what each of these things are, but you get the picture. There's these systems, there's these organizations, documents that are dedicated to sharing information. I called it jumping into the fire to drink from the hose. My first day in government was a little different. So I had to really dig around for answers. Didn't just waste my time and energy, but everybody else who had to answer the same questions, to stop what they were doing and what have you. And that's when it dawned on me that everything the testing grouplet did at Google was built on a combined platform of values and technology that already existed before I got there. So we needed a similar foundation in the government. Didn't exist yet. So what I do, I didn't realize at the time, but I was, and this is just a year and a half ago, I was trying to intuitively strive towards a learning organization. I learned about that term at DevOps Enterprise last October. And so I've only begun reading this book by Peter Senge. It's called The Fifth Discipline. But in his introduction, he talks about these 5 elements that go into a learning organization: personal mastery, shared vision, mental models, dialogue, and systems thinking. So this theme keeps coming up again. And everything he said in this intro has resonated so far, but especially this. He said, I have met many people who have experienced this sort of profound teamwork in sports or in the performing arts or business, and many say they have spent much of their life looking for that experience again. What they experienced was a learning organization. The team that became great didn't start off great. It learned how to produce extraordinary results. So, without realizing it, I was driven to recreate my learning organization experience. I tried to steal all the best ideas from Google that I could and adapt them to this new environment. And again, this is the abridged talk. Unfortunately, I don't have time to list the things I was doing in government, but we can still kind of see the picture very quickly. There are many things I was doing and my colleagues were doing, trying to fill in this same series of steps to cross the chasm. So even though, like just bears repeating, you just try anything, throw it at the wall, see if it sticks. And if it sticks, then you can figure out, hey, it fits in this model. These things actually are not disjoint. They reinforce one another. But the point of developing these tools and hinting at them here is to point out again that all these separate tools and initiatives, for me, they map to the same principles I believe made Google a great place to work and consequently a great force for good in our industry and society. Oh, But let me run through another 15 minutes worth of slides. So none of these ideas are new. You might remember 1975, Fred Brooks wrote the Mythical Man Month, talked about the dangers of adding more people to a late project because you're increasing communication complexity. He talked about focus on design. You won't need scurry algorithms. And then 10 years later, he talked about, hey, there's no silver bullet, but there is such a thing as, accidental complexity that you can solve with tools and languages. But then there's essential complexity that you just kind of have to deal with. You have to learn to buy versus build. You have to do rapid prototyping and iteration in 1986. You have to grow software organically, adding features as people gain experience in 1986. And so mainstream practice is still trying to catch up from his insights 30 and 40 years ago. So why is that? Well, I found a Harvard Business Study review that talked about why employees stay. They wanted to look not into the typical, oh, why are you leaving the company? But they wanted to find out why people decided to stick it out. Great article. Don't have time to go into the whole thing. But the point being, they noted that managers often assume that what's right for them is right for everybody else without actually trying to consider what would be right for everybody else. And that kind of resonates with my experience. Even new organizations tend to fall in the hierarchical trap. And as a result, you have a lot of managers that kind of focus on short-term profits, believe their own hype, and kind of look at employees as servants to do what they're told for the cold comfort of a paycheck. But at the end, they say most organizations historically have been and still are created and perpetuated by manipulative and conformist philosophies. If management wants employees to stay for reasons that are right for the individual, the corporation, and society, it must develop existentially managed organizations that truly accept and respect people with different values. And this article came out a month before I did. And this statement contains really deep echoes in an ideal system, which most of us should be familiar with, something that we've been taught from a very early age. I mean, think about the society and the industry that we enjoy today as a result of, what the accomplishment of the founders in the late 18th century. And they created a system based on service to the people, not to the service itself. And it so happens that, very quickly, our own industry has kind of developed its own culture in the open source world. And it takes it to an even further extreme. If you've read The Cathedral and the Bazaar, you might remember Eric Raymond broke down the development model of the Linux kernel, applied it to his own project. But he had this incredible quote from a Russian anarchist named, what's his name? Pyotr Alexeyevich Kropotkin. I'm sorry if there's any native Russian speakers here. But he said, I began to appreciate the difference between acting on the principle of command and discipline and on the principle of common understanding. The former works admirably in a military parade, but it's worth noting where real life is concerned, the aim can be achieved only through the severe effort of many converging wills. So it's kind of weird to quote a Russian anarchist right after talking about how great American republicanism is, but I think they both kind of understood that great accomplishments are the products of liberated individuals acting in concert. And Kropotkin thought anarchy was the way. I think the United States system has been more scalable, durable, and resilient because it provides a framework that actually values and protects individual rights and liberties. And this system can be amended incrementally over time as needed. They understood that innovation is an emergent property of a properly established system. And citizens have been free to experiment with crossing chasm after chasm ever since. The fact they got it right early is kind of a tragedy because we don't get to hear how the thing almost didn't work at all. Like, it was hanging by a thread for at least 40 years, I think. It wasn't just like these heroic geniuses that were like united and knew the right thing to do. They were fighting amongst each other as much as they were Britain and anyone else. And I think that story could speak a lot to those of us trying to bring about DevOps transformations. We're talking about the promise and practice of DevOps here at this conference, and we're trying to aim towards organizational greatness, cultivating all these principles. But I think let's go a little deeper. Let's think, what is DevOps really about? It is a powerful model for producing business value and business objectives. But at its essence, it's actually a toolkit for producing complex adaptive systems designed to shape human behavior. And at their best, these practices cultivate teamwork due to the convergence, not the coercion of wills. When that happens, an organization of the people, by the people, and for the people will produce insights, methods, products, and services that can bridge that chasm and not only satisfy the expectations of customers and society at large, but actually exceed them. Thank you.
All right, that's better. Okay, so we have, Jason, do you have all of your people lined up? Okay, so I need ThoughtWorks, PagerDuty, GitHub Custom Ink, and Red Hat. All right, where's Jake? He just, oh, here he comes. Okay, all right, great. That was a great opening keynote for us this morning. Thanks again to Mike. We're back to some more sponsor pitches. Remember, our sponsors are actually the thing that make this happen. This is something that I mentioned it to someone yesterday, and they were surprised to hear this, so I want to make sure that everyone knows this. The organizers that put on this conference, myself included, we are all volunteers. This is completely a community-run conference. We don't get paid to do this. We just do this out of the kindness of and love of you, our community, and the topics of DevOps. And so it is really because of our sponsors that we're able to put on this conference and have this amazing group of people come together over 2 days. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken, who's going to give us our first pitch from ThoughtWorks.
Thank you. And I'd say I'm an organizer in Seattle, and you guys do a great job here. And he's true. It is a lot of work. ThoughtWorks is about a 25-year-old software development consultancy. We specialize in high-risk, pretty disruptive change, frankly. People that want to change entirely the way they work in IT. The department I work for, we also create some tools. We're here today talking about our continuous delivery tools. There's a GoCD, the orchestration engine that was created by Jez Humble, the author of the book Continuous Delivery, which, by the way, we're raffling off, and Snap, which is a SaaS continuous delivery product. So happy to give demos or talk at the table. Thanks. Enjoy the conference.
All right. And be sure to thank our sponsors on Twitter if you're on Twitter using the DevOpsDays hashtag. Thanks. Okay, it looks like we have PagerDuty up next.
Hi, guys. How many of you here use PagerDuty? Not as many as I expected. We need to get more of you onto PagerDuty. I'm an engineer working at PagerDuty. I live the dream. I write code, ship it to production, and then when it breaks, I get paged. I have had my fair share of sleepless nights. So what PagerDuty does is it converts the output of this monitoring tool jungle out there into a reliable notification that reaches the right person at the right time. And more importantly, after that, it helps you track the resolution of the incident. And with PagerDuty watching over them, I think we have over 125,000 people working for over 7,000 plus organizations sleeping peacefully at night. And except when they get paged. Stop by our booth and sign up. We are going to give away this Beats headphone at 1:45 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave Ide from GitHub. Mike, thanks, great talk. How about 18F just awarding their first award on the Agile BPA the other day? Good stuff, right? So GitHub is a distributed okay, I'm kidding. There's probably 200 people here that know more about GitHub than I do, at least. Anyway, the overarching thing that I'm finding is the divide between GitHub at home and GitHub at work, and that's gotta change. I think everybody out here probably wants that to change. I can't make that change. You have to make that change. It changes by the folks in this room waving the flag and beating the drum and getting people to look at it and do it. I'm happy to help that, but I can't instigate it effectively. You have to. And also, by the way, GitHub Enterprise exists. For those that are unaware, I'm finding that to be fairly common. You can bring it behind your firewall, put it in AWS or Azure or someplace else, and get all the security folks off your back about .com. So that's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, I'm Jake Vanderdray with Custom Ink. Custom Ink, we print the t-shirts you design. So you go on the website, you can design a shirt, and we print it and mail it to you, and that's great. But the real business value is bringing communities together and groups together. So, right, we are, as DevOps, we are a community. Now we've got shirts, the conference shirts. When you go out and see other people, you're going to recognize them, and that's what we're really trying to do. So, like, whether it's your family, you're for a family reunion, or some other group and occasion, like that's what we're really trying to do. So, that's Custom Ink. Thanks.
Hey everybody, my name is Eamon. I'm with Red Hat. We are not just Linux. Raise your hand if you actually knew that. Anybody? So we're a $2 billion company that makes money selling free software, supporting free software. Linux was kind of the start of that, but we really, our engineers work in communities, so they work 100% in Fedora, OpenStack, Docker, Kubernetes, all the Apache projects, things like Hadoop and ActiveMQ and Camel. So our engineering work happens out there. We bring those products into Red Hat. We kind of secure them and beef them up and build a support organization around that, and that's what we deliver to our customers. Specifically for this event, I think OpenShift and Ansible are probably the two most relevant projects. OpenShift is kind of an enterprise packaging of Docker, Kubernetes, plus a whole bunch of other wiring and other technologies that are embedded in that. And then everybody knows about Ansible. It's kind of a no-brainer automation configuration management technology. It hits everything you can imagine: servers, desktops, network gear, Linux, non-Linux. We're actually friends with Windows now through that, and another relationship. Hell froze over last year. So anyway, that's Red Hat. We're out there. I'd love to talk to you about anything of interest. Thanks.
All right, very good. So next up, we have Betsy Nichols, who's going to talk to us about something incredible. What can I help you with? Oh, all right, okay, I can keep talking. Thanks, Ramez. That's super nice of him. So we have Betsy Nichols. The talk is, cost versus performance, walking the tightrope. Betsy is a returning speaker at DevOpsDays DC, so that's pretty awesome. Let's give a nice warm welcome to Betsy Nichols. Thanks, Betsy.
Thank you.
Is your mic on?
Is my mic on? Oh, no, I have to turn it on.
Aha.
Hello. Can you hear me?
All right.
Good, good. Okay. Okay, well, I guess welcome to day 2 of DevOps DC, DevOpsDays DC. This morning, what I want to talk about is money. Money. Yes, money. Money. The root of all evil. If it weren't for money, we wouldn't have all the baggage of chief financial officers, venture capitalists, Congress, people like that. We haven't talked about money much yet at this conference, so I thought maybe now would be a good time. But before I get started, let me ask one question. How many of you have had a really terrible performance problem? Or how many of you who routinely have performance problems have been able to just throw capacity at it until it went away? How many of you? Holy smokes, there are people that are raising their hand. Okay, you're in the wrong room. Nothing I say is going to help you today. But I would really like you to stay because I'd like to talk to you afterwards, find out how you pulled that off. Basically, what's at the root of the problem with money? Well, the first thing is that there's sort of conflicting forces always at work. If you're trying to get good performance, one way to measure it is response time, and if you throw capacity at the problem, response time typically goes down. Not always, but most of the time it goes down, and that's good, right? On the other hand, if you throw capacity at the problem, cost goes up, and that's bad, and that's kind of the essence of the problem, is that you just can't be profligate in your use of capacity. You have to use it the right way. So what ends up happening is you really have to achieve some sort of balance between the dollars that you're using and the performance. And so what I want to do is talk about ways that you can address this problem and begin to achieve the balance. The best way to do that is typically to look at a use case of some sort so that we can have some specificity. So I picked a use case that hopefully is fairly typical, that comes up pretty much all the time. And it's a business. In this case, it's a startup. And the business basically is completely fictional. But the data is real. I've taken the data from a real business and obviously changed the name to protect the innocent. By the way, does anybody know who this is? Am I too old to use this slide? Should I get rid of it? Dragnet. Yeah, Joe Friday, played by Jack Webb. And that was what every program began with that sentence. Anyway, we'll move right along. This is the business. It's not custom ink, it's custom nails. It's based on the proposition that nobody should have to go to a party without really great nails. And they should be able to get them over the internet. I don't know if this is a real idea. I did not check. But if it is, if it's already out there, then I apologize to the real people. But basically, it has a cast of characters, and this is the people, this is a set of people that have to sort of maintain the balance, or at least achieve the balance when it begins to get out of whack, so to speak. We have the CEO, who is really into fashion statements and very creative about creating new looks for the nails. So no woman can go to a party, or man can go to a party without great nails. And then you have developers, the dev side of DevOps, the ops side of DevOps, and then the CFO, who controls the money. And these are the characters that need to create the balance. So back when the company started, what they knew they had to do is develop a website so people could come, design their nails, and then wear them to the next party. So this is your typical website design. It's 3 tiers. Each tier is extensible. And this was what they decided they needed to build. So they decided also to go and use a cloud service. For the sake of this talk, we'll talk about AWS. So a lot of the terminology that I'll be using in the talk is AWS terminology. But these are the kinds of services that you can get in addition to just buying capacity by the hour. You can buy services by the hour, and there's a lot of them. I don't expect you to read them. They eventually designed the website, and these are the services that they ended up using. A lot of them. And as a result of this, they got a bill. Right? And this is real data. This is 2 years worth of bills, and as you can see, this business is starting to be pretty successful. That's the good news. But as you can see, there is a sort of a monotonic, inexorable rise in the cost. And of course, what this made was a balance began to be disturbed. The CFO began to get concerned. Are we spending too much money? Are we buying too much capacity? Is there any way we can save? Please tell me yes. And the guys on the other side of the balance began to have to think about this problem. I should ask, is there anybody here who's had to think about the problem of how much they're spending? Okay, good. You should stay. You're not in the wrong room. Okay. So the CFO, or the CEO, I should say the CEO, is primarily worried about keeping a balance amongst all the people on the either side of this tightrope. And the question is sort of how could he do this? And it takes thought. It takes creativity. It takes thinking outside the box. Does anybody know what this means? It's Latin, in case you didn't know. I mean, I don't want to insult you, but it's Latin. You know what this saying is? Mater artium necessitas. Mother is the need. Necessity is the need of the mother. Necessity is the mother of invention. That's what it is. This is necessity. We're out of balance. We need to get back into balance. Okay. So what's the path? What's a path that we can take? And we'll take it sort of in the context of custom nails. First thing is let's look at our bills. Let's see where the money's going. So we'll figure that out. Next question is a lot of the bill is buying capacity. What capacity is it that we're buying? And how are we allocating the capacity? Is there a mismatch between where the capacity is being deployed and how it's being utilized? We'll look at the ebb and flow of the workflow that we need to manage. One of the big advantages of going to a cloud service is it's elastic computing, and you can expand and contract. And let's look and see if there's some way we can take better advantage of that. There are complex pricing options. If anybody how many of you have looked at AWS pricing, for example? Yeah, it's complicated. I had no idea how complicated it was until I started looking at some of the data, which I'll show you. Finally, once you collect all this information, once you know sort of what your workload's looking like, what your capacity's looking like, you can put it all together in models and begin to see where you're wasting money, where you can save money, where you can reallocate capacity, that kind of thing, and finally get to the finish line. So let's start. Let's look at a bill. And here's the May bill for custom nails. And there's a color coding here. So what you can see almost immediately is the EC2 costs are dominating. EC2 costs are actually accounting for 69% of the AWS bill. This is useful to know because now you know where some low-hanging fruit is. Can you guess what it is? Look at your EC2s. Okay. Let's go for the fattest part of the bill. Okay, so we've got EC2s. We've been buying EC2s. How many of them do we have, and where are they being deployed? Well, most of them, of course, are being used in connection with the website and other things like inventory management and stuff like that. Maybe designers for the nail fashions and that sort of thing. But most of them are used in applications. And as it turns out, most of them are organized into auto-scaling groups that are headed up by an elastic load balancer. That's sort of good news because you can get a lot of information about what's going on. You can characterize your workload by looking at the arrival rate of requests, and you can do all sorts of other you can find out about a lot of the performance, response time, what's going on inside of the ASG with queue links and things like that. And of course, you can also look at cost, because your AWS bill will tell you exactly how much those EC2s are costing you every hour and how much the ASG and the ELB are costing you. So we've got a lot of good data that we can work with. So now that we've identified that ASGs are probably something good to look at, that's where most of our EC2s sit, let's look at some costs. And let's look at some utilization. So now this is the beginnings of actually a model where we're just taking data. We're not really doing much with it at this point. All we're doing is looking at how much each of our EC2s is costing and what is the average CPU utilization for each EC2 that belongs to those ASGs. Interesting. If you look at the height of the bars is the cost. That's what's being represented there. It's on the y-axis. It's on my left. Your left too, I think, actually. Okay. And then on the other axis is utilization. We picked utilization as a way of sort of characterizing how busy the resource is. There are other metrics you could use, but that's what we use for this case. And as you can see, there's well, there's actually 3 ASGs there that are probably worth looking at. We'll look at ASGC, which we've cleverly relabeled to anonymize the data. But that one is, it's costing a fair amount of money. It's the 3rd most expensive ASG, and it is only utilized at about 20%. So that's an interesting candidate for us to look at. We could look at the other ones, D and F and E. We could look at those as well, but we're limited. So we're going to just look at ASGC. Okay, let's look at ASGC. Well, here's what it looks like. It's a bunch of EC2s. There's 11 of them. And what it's doing is it's maintaining a response time that we set at 3 seconds. I just picked that number arbitrarily. But the idea is to keep the response time of this ASG whenever it runs a task, that it responds in less than 3 seconds. And in order to do that, we configured it with 11 ASG nodes, and the number of nodes in that ASG never changes. You know, you can set it so that the minimum is X and the maximum is Y. Well, X equals Y in our case, and it's 11. And we're assuming, basically, that we're going to keep 11 nodes with a maximum workload. We're keeping them so that we can always serve that maximum workload. Whenever it arrives, doesn't matter when it's arrived, we're ready for it. We got 11 nodes, and we can keep it under the response time under 3 seconds. That's the way it's configured right now. Okay. One of the things we'll start doing is measure workload in terms of requests per second, just to keep things more concrete. Now, when you look at the actual requests per second, it doesn't look anything like a flat line. Okay, this suggests some things to us. Okay, we'll see what. So let's look now at the other side of the equation. We sort of looked at performance mostly. Now let's look at the money side. And there are 4 major factors that determine how much you have to pay for an EC2 in AWS, and it's pretty much true of any other cloud service provider. One is the location. Which data center is it in? And we're not going to move our EC2s. Let's not do that. Let's not worry about that. Second thing is the operating system. We're not going to change our operating system. No. But what we may want to do is look at the types of instances we're buying. We can buy instances with just a few cores or a lot of cores, or a little bit of memory, a lot of memory. Optimized for disk access, IOPS, that kind of thing. But we're not going to. We can do that. And so maybe we ought to spend just a moment looking at that. Well, if you look at that, here's where you begin to understand the complexity of pricing for AWS. There are all these different regions. That's down the first column there. All the various different operating systems. So if you pick a region and you pick an operating system, then what's in the box there is how many different SKUs you can order. That's a lot. Okay, maybe this is one thing we can do, is we can simplify our lives and just say, okay, this is too complicated, let's move on. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, our stuff is in US East, we're going to buy M3 larges, that's what we have now, we're running Linux, and it's May. Okay, so that's that. So the one remaining thing that we should really look at maybe is the different types of pricing options. Number of pricing options, there's really 3 basic pricing options, and they're shown in this slide. The most important features of those various pricing options are listed in the first column. Briefly, on demand, you can buy an hour at a time. You can rent an EC2 for 1 hour of time. You don't have to put up any money up front. You can just buy it, and you can keep it as long as you like. Whoa. Okay. That's what happens when you talk about money, right? My computer seems... Okay, that's not working. Okay, I'll carry on. Let's go back. Okay, so there's on-demand, and that you don't have to put any money up front. It's also the most expensive, but it's not very high risk. You can usually get an on-demand instance when you want it. You can keep it as long as you want it, and then you can let it go. Reserved instance is a completely different situation. You buy things a year or 3 years in advance, and it's cheaper. But the good news is that you've got it reserved. You know you have it. Whether you want it or not, you have it. And that's the sort of middle range of pricing. And then the cheapest is spot pricing. And that is a deep, dark, black market. Nobody knows how Amazon does its pricing. And I decided to test the hypothesis that a spot price is always less than an on-demand price. Seems like a reasonable hypothesis, right? Yeah, well, not so much. There are cases where that's not true. There are also cases where it's really hard to keep 10 spot instances all up and running at once because AWS can kill it pretty much any time it wants to. So that represents high risk but potentially low cost. So you've got a sort of a range of pricing options here. Okay, we've gathered all this data. We now know about who we are. We know about what our pricing options are. What kind of models can we use to help us decide, find areas to save money? Well, the first thing we can do is leverage the pricing options. If I go back and kind of create a very simple model that shows how many instance hours you're consuming, let's say, during the course of a week against the price that you're paying for those instance hours, what you'll notice is there's two types of pricing options that are metered, basically. They're dependent upon your actual usage of instance hours. And in the case of on-demand pricing, if you're running an EC2 instance for maybe half the week, roughly, it might be cheaper for you to go and put your money up front and buy a 3-year reserved instance, and then you're paying less per hour. So that's what this model is telling you. It's giving you sort of an idea of where the point of diminishing returns is for using on-demand things. And the more you use it, the higher the percentage of the week that you're using it, then the cheaper it is to go with some of the reserved options. Okay, and spot, who knows? Okay, so let's go back to our starting point. This is our ASG again, ASG number C, letter C, whatever. This is our workload. Does anything jump out at you? Yeah. Let's buy some reserved instances. That's the minimum. We need those all the time, no matter what happens. People are buying nails, night and day. It's a very successful business. So immediately we can start that way. Now immediately we've gained some real credibility with the CFO. He knows we're trying. And it's a pretty simple thing. You just go, you can decide whether to put a bunch of money up front or not, but you can get reserved instances. So next thing we can do is let's look at leveraging scaling. Because if I go back, okay, you can see that I am buying capacity when I really don't need to have it. One thing that's sort of interesting is that there are many different types of patterns where capacity and workload vary. There's some seasonal kinds of patterns that are quite regular. It's low at night, it's high in the middle of the day, and then it gets lower. Those are regular kinds of seasonal patterns, and you can use analytics to discover those seasons. In this case, it's sort of interesting. The shape of the peaks, kind of is the same. They're very similar. So there's models around shapelets, where even if the shapes don't occur at regular points in time, you can recognize a shape when you see it, and then recognizing the beginning of a shape will help you decide, how much you need to scale. So all these are possibilities. Let's just talk about one. That's all we have time for. So let's leverage some of the model for scaling. And this is old school model. It's not new art or anything. It's called the MMC queuing model. It has a bunch of assumptions associated with it, which I could go through in great detail. But the point is that all of these are testable with data. If you collect historical data and you can go back and look at it, you can see whether your arrival rates are following a particular distribution and what their average arrival rate is. You can test that. So you can decide from your own data whether this is a model that fits. And you can do that with all of the assumptions. There's one assumption there at the bottom that the buffer for holding things in queues is of infinite size. We know immediately that's not true. But the rest of them, are maybe reasonable. So assuming that the data sort of matches this, then we have some equations There'll be a quiz at the end of the equations. And here's a way of, if you run the model, here's a way of sort of visualizing the results. And what's interesting is, what you have is, of course, along the x-axis is the workload that you're getting, the arrival rate. And what is on the y-axis is really the goal. It's defining what I want, where I want to be on the graph in terms of height, so to speak. And my response time, I've set the goal as 3 seconds. So that's what the red line is. And all of the other lines are runs of the model for various numbers of nodes. So for example, if I wanted to keep response time less than 3 seconds at an arrival rate of, say, 8 jobs per second, then I'd have to have, how many nodes? I'd have to have, looks like at least 10 nodes. I'd be running a risk with only 8. So now what we really have is, for some inputs that we can measure, which are things like service times, arrival rates, all of this stuff you can get from CloudWatch. And I got a goal of response time. If I'm clear about that, then the output is essentially a mapping. If I see an arrival rate of X, I know how many nodes I need to have. So I've got a scaling strategy now, potentially, that I can create on an hourly basis every day. That's pretty good. So in the end, what I end up is with an ASG that looks like this instead. And I've probably saved another third of the cost of this ASG by just doing that. I could do it automatically. I could do it manually. All those kinds of details you need tools to do. And but the key is that the tools need to, of course, take advantage of knowing both what's happening performance-wise as well as what's happening cost-wise. OK, now you can do both, of course, and you get something like this. And if you have written your application as a collection of microservices, let's say, and if you lose an ASG, or you lose an ES2, excuse me, if you've bought a spot one and AWS tries to kill it, if you've done that, well, then you can begin to create, populate your ASG with a few spots, just to save a little bit more. Another option that you can do is add some tweaks to the model. How fast do you want to scale up when you recognize a peak coming? How fast do you want to scale down when you think the peak is over? That kind of thing. So once you get all that, then you've got a pretty good solution, and you've hopefully won the heart and the mind of the CFO that you're doing everything you can. And at least this is one path to beginning to take a systematic view of where you're allocating your capacity and how you can save money. So in the end, the big takeaways, I guess, are that AWS is happy to sell you capacity. How you choose to use it is what matters. If you don't use it carefully, then you're going to be paying too much. And the way you can resist paying too much is to know your own workload, your own environment, leverage models, and you can walk this tightrope. You can definitely walk this tightrope if you do that. So you may not get it right the first time, but the most important thing is keep up your enthusiasm and keep trying. That's it. Thank you. Oh, I guess I can do this. That's
awesome. Thanks very much, Betsy.
Thank you.
That's great. OK, next up is a break. We'll see you back here at 10:45, I think. Let me make sure that that's the right time. 10:45, definitely 10:45. We'll see you right back here then. Thanks. Test, test. All right, come on in, grab a seat. So what did you think of the first two talks? Yeah, very good. And I'm certainly glad that Betsy didn't actually ask us to do any of that math. Thank you. Next time, I'll remember that during the CFP. Speaking of the CFP, it was incredible. As much as I love the single track, there is a time when I hate the single track. I'll be honest about that. And that's when we're reviewing 100+ talk submissions for basically 8 speaking slots. That week, what I wanted was a 12-track conference so that I could accept all of the great talks. It was really, it's a really difficult problem to go through. I mean, it's a good problem to have, no doubt. But if you submitted a talk and it wasn't selected, know that your talk was likely amazing, but there was only so much capacity that we have. Also, if you submitted a talk and we didn't accept it, or even if we did, there are plenty of meetups that happen around the area, and they're often looking for speakers, so you can share your story there. Speaking of sharing stories, I'm going to turn it over to Simmons, who's going to take us through our next one. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan. Good morning. I'm Simmons. I work here at USPTO. I've been a federal employee for just under a year. I think my official title is like GS 2210 IT Specialist. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm the tech lead for FP&G. And FP&G is a system built here, managed here by the CFO. And sorry. And I'm happy to be here. Oh, and I'm passionate about DevOps. And I'm even more passionate, yeah, sorry for the stall. And I'm even more passionate about how the federal government builds and deploys software. And so I was just talking to someone from FDIC, but my hope is that after this talk, this gets some conversations going. I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just telling our story. But before I get into the story, it is Thursday, right? Let me do a throwback Thursday. So this time last year, we were right here. The DevOps conference was hosted in 2015 here at USPTO. And FP&G, the system I just mentioned, was right in the throes of development, right? And I think we were a little frustrated that we had some code in production, but we didn't have all of our code in production. And there was probably 20 or 30 USPTO employees that were at this conference. And we all kind of looked at each other and said, hey, I think we can do better, right? We had folks from CM, we had folks from platform, we had folks from database, we had infrastructure as code folks, and those all were folks that worked for John Owens, the CIO, who gave the kickoff speech earlier this morning, or yesterday morning. And then I'm from the CFO representing the development crew, right? And I think we were both sort of using each other collectively, but we had this parallel vision, and it was okay, because we wanted to do DevOps. There's a couple slides for you. So, but let me back up. Let me talk a little bit about USPTO. Anyone know what this is? Right, it's I think an X-Wing fighter from Star Wars. It was a patent issued in 1980 to 20th Century Fox Film Corporation. And I think we could all agree Star Wars has probably generated billions and billions of dollars for the US economy and worldwide. And this is exactly what the Department of Commerce, and more particular USPTO, wants us to happen, right? USPTO is the agency responsible for registering patents, granting patents, and registering trademarks. And in doing this, they meet Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the US Constitution that gives the legislative branch the power to progress the useful arts and sciences. Man, that still gets me goosebumps, right? Pretty cool stuff. So our customers, USPTO's customers, are the innovation community. And we've got to keep up with them, right? And we've got a bunch of old systems here at USPTO that we're trying to collectively bear hug to get rid of. And this is a next generation system of the fee processing next gen. This is the system that I'm the tech lead for. If you look to the left, you see the payment screen. This is where payments happen. You look to the right, you see Financial Manager, where folks can write or build reports and see reports on all their transactions. This system collects $3 billion a year, right? This is a real system. And these $3 billion a year this is the revenue. John mentioned this yesterday. This is the revenue that funds USPTO. So USPTO doesn't operate from your classic taxpayer revenue. It is provided from a service that we provide for fees. And FP&G is kind of popular, right? This is a time slice from a recent time slice of all the places all around the world that people are submitting patents and submitting trademark applications. And my point with this is from Google Analytics, one of the tools we use for monitoring. And my point with this is that this is a real application, $3 billion, 24/7. We can't be bringing the system down. Maintenance is unacceptable, or downtime is unacceptable for maintenance. So I think we can agree we need DevOps, right? And this isn't just an iPhone app, right, that keeps track of your kid's swim team. This is serious stuff. But we have a little challenge, right? My 6-year-old drew this picture of a dinosaur. And some of this may look familiar. It's got 5 legs on it. Some of you, and a couple bows at the top, right? But this picture may look familiar to some of you in large organizations or even in the federal government, right? And most of the work happens sort of here at the belly of the dinosaur, sort of dev and test, right? So a user story comes into the process, developers work on it, testers work on it. The Scrum Master looks at the project manager, who looks at the testers, who looks at the developer and says, all right, we're done. But we all know they're not really done, right? There's all this important stuff that has to take place after. You've got security testing. You've got code standard reviews, performance testing, 508 section testing, right? And then something comes up, it's called the ORR, Operational Readiness Review. You know, acronym in the government here. And that's where folks get around. There's probably 20, 30, 40 folks that get around and sort of collectively give this check mark, raise their hand and say, yep, platform's good, database is good, security's good, 508's good, all of this is good. And it leads to just moving slow, right? And then you can go live and put code into production, right? And that's actually when you're done. So what did we do about it? We created a pilot. The oldest sales trick in the book, right? We just got our foot in the door. And we had one focused but powerful goal. And let me read it for you. Deploy within a 24-hour time frame FP&G approved software fixes for defects found in production. Okay, and let me kind of call out a few things. So 24 hours. What we're talking about here is from developer commit to production, right? 24 hours. This isn't Google, it's not Amazon, we're not doing 20,000 deploys a day, but we're doing 1 in 24 hours, right? We think a huge increase in speed, right? Historically, this would take, you see it in the federal government, weeks, maybe even months, right? And the other thing with 24 hours is this is where we really put our stake in the ground. We wanted to shock people, right? I'd have people saying to me, Simmons, but why don't you start slow? Maybe once a month, once a week. But that's not really DevOps. And that was an improvement on the current process. And what we wanted to do was a rip and replace. FP&G. There's 100 some odd systems here at USPTO. And we're not talking for the entire enterprise. We're just talking for one system. An important system, but one system. And then defects. And this part is kind of where we cheated a little bit, right? We weren't ready to quite solve that hard dinosaur problem, so we were just talking defects that had been found in production, okay? And kind of speaking of that, sometimes you'll see in large organizations too, there's like this, something they call like emergency hotfixes or critical hotfixes, where maybe historically testing doesn't take place, right? Folks would ask me, well, Simmons, you're doing a critical fix. Are you testing? Of course we're testing. And part of our thought here was we were actually upping our game on emergency and critical hotfixes by rolling it through a battery of automated tests. So the rigor was increased for defects. Not reducing anything, just increasing speed, upping rigor. So how do we get started? The first thing we did was, so after this meeting, there was like a handful of us, and we were in rogue mode and back alleys kind of plotting our mission. But at some point, we kind of had to pop our heads out, right? And the first thing we did was we got a policy change done, right? Sometimes in the federal government, it's like a policy change almost requires an act of Congress. In this case, it didn't. This is something I'm very proud of. But what you'll see here is this is a signature from Tony Scardino and John Owens, the CFO and the CIO. This, to me, at USPTO is DevOps, right? You got the dev folks, the op folks, both signing off on the policy. Mark Schwartz, I think a couple years ago, he gave a talk about the policy, or the SDLC policy as it was written at his agency. And he's got this like 300-page document he brings out, right? And our goal was to make this one page. We didn't quite make that, but this is an 11-page document in the federal government that oversees how we do SDLCs. And so in this document, this is a little bit of our process overview. Not rocket science, but let me go through it. The first is we identify a defect. We make sure, we assess the defect, make sure that it is within FP&G, it's not a different system, and that it's critical or emergency enough that we want to fix it. We go and fix it, right? But sort of the difference here, though, is that if there's a defect in production, we assume that there's not a test that was covering that particular scenario. So then there's a parallel commit, done by the developer and the tester into source control. Once that happens, the stopwatch starts, and this is where the 24-hour countdown happens. So then there's robots that promote the code to a test environment and then run it through a battery of tests. Automated security tests, automated performance tests, automated functional tests. And then we review those results. And that's me reviewing those results, the tech lead for FP&G, the development team, not some third party. And we make a decision, we push another button that then starts the process over again. Just because we're paranoid, takes it to the QA environment, promotes the code, runs the battery of tests, we review those results. And then from there, yours truly looks at those results, pushes another button, and it goes to production. Similar process. We also do a blue-green switch, which I'll get around to talking about in a second. And then finally, we review, where we're monitoring the results and do a retrospective internally to the team to figure out how can we go from 24 hours to 23 hours or 22 hours. And so we're trying to squeeze as much out as we can. And the architecture. This is not the architecture of FP&G, but just simply the architecture of the pipeline. Okay, so the developer commits into source control. The heart of the operations is the build management tool, which kicks off builds, puts the artifacts into a repo. We have a pipeline orchestration tool, which is sort of more of like the reporting and orchestration side of the pipeline, that then kicks off cloud management and the CM tool, which deploys to the different test environments. On the bottom left, we have a handful of test slaves, which are executing these battery of tests against the test environment, the QA environment, and then finally to production. So I chose 3 key factors and I could talk to I'm blue in my face about a bunch of different factors, but these are 3 that we picked out. So the first is automated testing. I loved hearing Mike talk about automated testing this morning. This is something I'm absolutely passionate about. And these are just a handful of things that I think are important, or we think are important with automated testing. So the first is testers and developers are co-located. Right? So many times you'll see the developers have to throw the code over the wall to a different state, different country, different room. And we want developers and testers in the room together. And these testers have a front seat at the table, right? They're a part of the team. And the entire team is responsible for breaking the system, right? I've kind of got this like saying that I say every user story, the last acceptance criteria has a bullet point that says, and is easily testable, right? And the whole team is concentrated on doing this. Oh, and this is something I'm really passionate about. So that We also have tiny, tiny test cases. And I'm not talking XUnit stuff here. I'm talking browser tests, browser-based tests, right? When I first got on board, we were automating the manual test case, right? So we would click, there would be clicks from page to page, button to button, control to control, and that was being automated, right? But then if it broke, you didn't first, it was brittle, and second, if it broke, you didn't know where it broke. Was it on page A? Was it on page B? Which control had the problem? And so now we've got these tests. We've got 3,000 or 4,000 tests that test the tiniest thing that we can test, like one particular control, one particular drop-down, one particular save button. And these tests are self-documenting, right? So an example of a test would be like, ensure that when I put in 17 digits on a credit card number that the screen fails and you get an error that says you must put in 16 digits, right? So that when we're operating in this 24-hour window, we see a test fail, we know exactly what failed and exactly what needs to fix. It helps us move faster. We also have our tests, we want them environment agnostic. You saw the QA environment, the test environment. We want to be able to run on any environment at any time. We also create independent fake third-party systems, right? FP&G talks to a handful of different systems, some internal to USPTO, some external to USPTO. I can kind of give you an example. As part of patent maintenance fees, every few years, the folks that own patents have to come in and pay a maintenance fee. And there's another system here at USPTO that says, does this patent need to have a maintenance fee paid on it, right? And if you pay for that maintenance fee, it doesn't need to be paid anymore. So if you run that same test 24 hours later, that test fails. So we had to build a fake version of that system that just responded and said, needs to be paid, needs to be paid, needs to be paid, so that we could run these tests over and over. We were also addicted to the drug that is data. These tests would run on environment A with database A, but then when you changed out the data, the test would fail. And so each test is completely idempotent, where it's responsible for its setup and its teardown. And we also use a feature toggle framework to be able to turn on and off these fake systems. These results are reviewed daily by the Scrum team. Their highest priority is fixing the failing test cases. And we also have to have a proper FTE ratio, right? It's not 20 developers to one tester, but it's the proper ratios because the team is trying to break the system. And then we have also realized quality resources is critical, right? These folks are really kind of developers. They're technical. They're writing code. They're building another system to break FP&G. Monitoring. So this is a screenshot of our war room, where we have developers from FP&G monitoring the system. And I think historically, at least in the government, you kind of think, when you think of monitoring, you think of like NOC and SOC, sort of more at the network and security level. And we still have that. We've got a room this big, 3 floors up, doing that. But this room is just dedicated to the app, right? We're talking errors in log files. We're talking stack traces. My dream hasn't happened yet, but my dream is we're monitoring. We see real time when someone has an issue. And before the end user calls and complains about the issue, we've triaged the issue, fixed the issue, and even deployed the issue to production, right? We've gotten maybe halfway there. And the third is blue-green. I think you see this on the internet. My favorite, Martin Fowler talks about this quite a lot with blue-green. And the concept is, sorry, just sort of some background. Concept is there's sort of 2 instances of FP&G running, a blue one and a green one. And it's just 3 floors up here in the data center. And only one's active at any one time. And so when we go to do a hotfix, we deploy to the passive side, right? Verify everything looks OK, do some general smoke testing. And then if it looks OK, we flip a switch at the load balancer. The end user has no idea this is going on. Traffic is then routed to now what is the passive environment, right? Sounds pretty simple. In reality, it wasn't so simple, right? We had a lot of issues. This is our FP&G architecture overlaid, right? Just a couple of things we had issues, right? We had sort of a split brain thing going on. Blue would be talking to green, green would be talking to blue, sort of different versions of the software talking to each other. Just created a little chaos. And then background jobs. Man, that caused some serious problems. We'd have 2 sets of background jobs running, 2 sets of emails, 2 sets of payments. Scary stuff, right? But we've worked through it all. So far, so good. And this is not an endorsement from USPTO on any tools that we use. But I'll just give you some examples. So we've got a perf loading tool. We've got a cloud management tool. Our security tool is running OWASP top 10 security tests. Pipeline orchestration tool, kind of similar to the demo we saw from Cap 1. We've got APM instrumentation. Wow, that has changed our lives. Build management tool, think sort of Jenkins, Hudson, cruise control. CM tool, think Puppet, Chef, source control, an artifact repo, and log management, right? I'll give you a guess on which one we use. So what's next? Well, we want to do more than just hot fixes, right? We want to use the pipeline. All of that work we had done for hot fixes, we want to apply to sort of that dinosaur, right? But we have a problem, right? It goes back to the dinosaur. That's my 7-year-old there ripping it up. But we've got to get over this mountain, right? And how are we going to do that? We think it's about empowerment, right? It's the Scrum teams actually deciding what done means and being done for real at the end of a sprint. And we think the Scrum team that has security folks in it, that has performance folks in it, that has 508 folks in it, are responsible for defining the definition of done and ultimately making sure that, and then defining when they can go to production. And why do we want to do this? Because we're going to get code in production faster. So this is an artistic picture by Audrey Wang. She's USPTO does this thing every year. I think it's done nationally, but there's Bring Your Kid to Work Day, and I think it was last month. And we were all in a team room, sort of discussing what our definition of done for this release was. And Audrey, she's a clever girl, was kind of in the back. Was like, all right, I'm gonna draw this picture of definition of done, right? And it's a butterfly going through this metamorphosis, right? So I had to ask my 8-year-old, what is the metamorphosis for a butterfly? And I think it's egg, caterpillar, chrysalis, and then butterfly, right? And butterflies, you're done. You're actually done. But then my 8-year-old was like, but Dad, the process starts over again. And she's right. That's exactly what we want to do. At the end of the sprint, we want to be done, put it in production, and then do it again. And so here are just a couple of examples. We're sort of chipping away at it slowly, right? Where we don't have everything done for us right now does not mean production, at least for new features. But these are some things that we're trying to do. And over time, we're going to add things more and more to the definition of done. So we've got product owner acceptance, code review, automated testing, code traceability, unit testing, review of performance, and then review of logging. So this is my buddy Thomas Jefferson down in Charlottesville. And Thomas Jefferson has this concept of that he's written about a few times, which is like sharing ideas, right? And so, and it's based on sort of a torch, right? If I'm holding a torch and I light your torch, it doesn't diminish my torch. It just simply gives light or fire to you. And so my point with this is, please come and share your ideas with me. I want to see how we can up our game in the federal government. Thank you.
All right. So next up we have our sponsor pitches, which we might be just a touch ahead of schedule, so the sponsors are quickly running up. Yeah, all right, great. Jason's there. Lovely. Okay, so if we could switch to my laptop on the presenter, that would be great. Does someone have the chimes, Mike? Oh, great. We want to make sure our sponsors don't talk longer than they should. Okay, we're looking for Ansible. All right. So while we're waiting, what questions can I answer for you? I'm sorry, I won't. I'm not allowed to say. What's the big news with Chef? Yeah, that's a great question. Go to bignews.chef.io and tune in for that webinar next week. Yeah. That's not the answer you're looking for? Oh, sorry. All right. We're good. All right, excellent. So again, thanks to our sponsors for helping make this possible. Ansible, I think you're up next, or up first. You can come on up, head this way. All he needs is a microphone. Cool. Did I mention that the organizing committee is completely made up of volunteers? Here we go.
Hey everybody, my name is Tyler Cross, so I'm a specialist solution architect at Red Hat for the Ansible product. I just wanted to introduce what Ansible is in general. Sorry, this sounds weird. So Ansible is really the tool for automating every aspect of how you do DevOps automation, of provisioning, configuration management, and really it's a new way of doing automation because of its agentless design. So we have over 550 modules that are, obviously it's all open source, sold by Red Hat, and it can simplify every aspect of how you do operations without extra tools to solve problems around how do we collaborate on the technology. So that's Ansible in a nutshell. Didn't want to bore you with too much, but check out ansible.com. There's a lot of good resources there, and obviously recently being acquired by Red Hat has given us a lot of resources, so times are looking good. Thanks.
First off, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's great to see DevOps Days look good. So I'm with DLT Solutions. Who are we? Well, you heard from Ansible just now. You heard from Red Hat. You heard from GitHub. You've heard from SolarWinds. CloudBees is here. We've talked about Amazon Web Services. We're a engineering-focused value-added reseller that helps support all of those teams, all of those products, all of those vendors, and we can help with design, implementation, 24/7 support around any and all of those products and a whole lot more that would take me way more than a minute to actually describe to you. We're based locally here in Virginia. Primary focus is on the public sector. So from the sales side, when we talk about GWACs and all those other sorts of things that I don't understand because I'm an engineer, we've got a whole staff of people that can help you guys acquire and implement all of these solutions from all of these various different top tier vendors as you guys are looking to move into new environments and whatnot. That's enough. Thanks much. Appreciate your time.
Hello. Hey, it's on. Good morning, Washington. Hey, everybody. I'm Robert Treat. I work at OmniTI. We are, I guess, like a DevOps consultancy. We help people build and run large-scale web and IT infrastructure. We've been one of the pioneering groups with DevOps, so we're like super excited to see the turnout and all that's come. I've helped co-organize here in DC for the last couple of years. Been really honored to work with folks that do that. It's a volunteer effort. It's a lot of work. Wanted to let you know, also helping to co-organize a DevOps Day in Baltimore later this year, so we hope you'll take the long trek up 95. I know it's bad, but it's worth it. Come and join us for that. Also wanted to let you know, before people did conferences on the East Coast, we started a conference called Surge. It's all about web scalability and IT and sort of like all the hot goodness that's out there. We're going to be giving away a free ticket to that. It's held in National Harbor, so that also probably sounds really far away, but you can take a ferry boat ride to get there, so it's actually really awesome to go. We hope you'll join us for that. That's in September, later this year. Stop by our booth. We're out by the little waterfall area and drop your card in. We're hoping to give out a free ticket. Otherwise, we'll see you in September. Thanks.
Thanks for letting me pitch y'all. I work for a company called ASP Training. We're one of the larger training firms, and I lead a division there called TechTown, and we focus on teaching large enterprises and government agencies how to do sort of enterprise continuous delivery, test automation, all of the many, many things that go into this family of practices and ideas that we would call DevOps. So we've got a booth out there. We've got literature on all of our many classes. We've taught, including here at the USPTO, which we're very honored to be going into our 5th workshop, which we're going to be teaching to them pretty soon. Couple things, grab some literature, mention that. Also, we're going to be raffling off this little miniature DevOps library of books, 5 of my picks by Jez Humble, Gary Groover, W. Edwards Deming, a couple others. Some of my I think, useful books for everybody. So feel free to stop by and talk to us. Huge thanks to the committee. We're also organizing our own DevOps Days in the Raleigh-Durham area in October. So if anybody happens to be in North Carolina, come out and grab us, and thank you.
This thing on? Oh, cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Leo Laskin from Sauce Labs. We're a massive Selenium grid based completely in the cloud. We support up to 700 browser OS combinations, so if you're looking to do cross-browser testing or any sort of functional UI testing, we're definitely the people to call. And just so you know, if you were using us in the time that you listened to our vendors give our pitch here, your testing could be done by now.
All right, that's great. So just one more quick round of applause for all of our sponsors. You guys can come on up and start getting set up. I'll tap dance while you do that. I'll say some words. I don't know. Yeah, our sponsors really do make this event possible, and it's great to have them all here. Of course, not every sponsor gets to pitch to you. There are other sponsors that are out there with tables. Be sure that you stop by and talk with them about all of the stuff that they have. And we're going to turn it over here in just a second to Mike and Nick. And after this, we go into the Ignite talks for today. So if you are an Ignite presenter for this afternoon or for this morning, make sure that you are lined up over here on my left, on your right, lined up over there at the end of this talk. So in the next 30 minutes or so. And let's see, guys, how are we looking? Ready to head off into the final frontier? All right, let's do it. Are your mic? Hello, hello.
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
All right. Take it away, Mike and Nick.
All right. So I'm Mike Nescott. This is Nick Grace.
Oh.
Hello. Hello. Hi. Hey, everybody.
Yay.
Thank you. So I'm Mike Nescott. This is Nick Grace. I've been passionate in trying to move forward DevOps at our company, JBS International. And Nick has been very passionate in moving ahead our processes in user experience as well, in similar goals related to DevOps, in doing things better, more of a focus on the user and the end product. So, continuous UX, the next frontier. What does this mean besides shameless pandering to a tired science fiction cliche? Well, playing upon what's the themes that some of the other speakers have talked about during the last awesome 2 days, one of the great things about DevOps is it's sort of hard to define exactly what it is. But we know it's going to be different and it's going to be better tomorrow because we're continuously evolving the concept of DevOps. We're continuously trying to share with other communities, to learn from other teammates, to learn from other projects. And along with this, we want to focus on the end product. You know, the customer, the end user. Looking at what Mark Schwartz said about value yesterday. The customer, the product owner, they don't care if you're running Docker in production, much as you might hope for that. This was a blog post that came through my inbox the other day on the DevOps mailing list that emphasizes the fact that you want to avoid just doing DevOps. You have to see what DevOps means, even though it's awesome on itself, what it means in terms of the larger picture, in delivering value to the product owner or to the user. So having discussions with Nick and his team over the years at JBS that we've been trying to push forward DevOps, I've been impressed by some of the parallels in some of the techniques and the tools that Nick has been trying to implement so that his team can work along with our team and deliver better values for our clients in the government space. Some of the concepts that we're going to be just delving into looking at today is user interface, all these acronyms and terms related to design and development. This is one of the problems in trying to work together is that everyone has their own frame of reference, and there's a million things to call every discipline and every process you're trying to follow. Is it design? Is it design? Is it delivery? Are you engineering something, or architecting something, or delivering something? In the end, it really doesn't matter as long as you focus together on the user. So let's talk a little bit about the foundations of design with the understanding that knowing what you're at and what understandings you have of what you're dealing with now, it's helpful to look at where that came from. So going back to people like Raymond Loewy, who really established design as an independent discipline. Henry Dreyfuss, who started to focus specifically on the user. Charles and Ray Eames, who early on started to focus on something that's relevant today, which is how does the user experience scale as you move at different, especially with mobile becoming such a different form factors. How does it scale? How does it adjust and adapt when you have different medium, when you have different contexts? Dieter Rams, who started to focus on the fact that form and function are sometimes different, and how do you integrate those experiences in the most effective way to serve different human needs? And then some folks like Bill Modridge and Terry Winograd, who started bringing design more into the digital area, talking about how we actually bring the computer and the user interaction into play with this. One thing that we're increasingly realizing is that UX is not just graphics. It's just pretty pictures. It involves a complex interaction between the user interface, the user's capabilities of their devices, what they're motivated to do, what they're being prompted to do, and how they feel their needs are being satisfied, how friendly and adaptable the information design and the UX is to their personal context and needs. Looking at how design more recently has adopted some of the agile methodologies that were also common with DevOps. In the 50s, we started having that focus on human factors and ergonomics. Don Norman has a big history in the role in bringing the components of cognitive science and interaction design and making things visible and being able to make design resilient in understanding that things are always not going to go as you initially planned. And then more recently, there's this whole concept of design thinking, which is, again, looking at different perspectives. This is the idea that everyone can benefit, be it a DevOps person or a security person, from adopting some of the principles of design. That if we can, start thinking like a designer from some standpoint, we can gain new perspectives in how DevOps is actually delivering value to the user. Some of the other foundations of Agile UX that have been talked about in this conference, the whole Agile software development movement, the lean movement, the idea that in often cases the most efficient thing you can do, the most effective thing you can do is do the minimal upfront by delivering an MVP, and that allows you to iterate quickly to reach the end goal. We heard about the idea of systems thinking raised earlier today and how that integrating all the components of a system and making sure they all work together is important in delivering the final product and the user experience. Looking at how some of the luminaries in design have visualized and viewed the architecture of the user experience. First of all, from a conceptual standpoint, there's this idea that you move from conception to the concrete side by looking at what the user actually needs and then building that from the back end upwards. And then this is looking at the same set of components from a more architectural standpoint. We see that user design, user experience, along with the visual aspects of things, also involve in terms of a web application or another type of system, the navigation of that system. And then the actual content and the way in which that organized, the way in which that is organized is also key to the user experience. Along with that, how do the user interface and that information architecture, the way in which that information is described and related, those terms, and those pieces of content, how does that actually satisfy the user needs? We had heard one of the earlier talks about this concept of throwing stuff over the wall, and how part of DevOps has been about trying to move away from this model and working together and not just handing off something from the developer to the operations staff in a package that's incomprehensible, and then trying to run away when things don't work. It's important to understand that there is no shortage, unfortunately, of silos and of battles that are out there in the organizations we work in. And similar to the dev and ops divide that we've been focused on overcoming, there's been a long-standing divide between the dev and design side of things. And there's often been a proclivity to view the designers as more creative people and the ops as more technical people, not understanding that there's actually short changes, both sides of that equation, both sets of people. I mean, we as DevOps folks, the people in the development team, need to benefit from creativity, and part of what the Agile UX movement has brought into bear is that there are benefits from the designers thinking more on the technical aspects of things, in delivering the concepts of design in a more structural, repeatable fashion. And so there's, as we know, along with, similar to what we've had with the emphasis on infrastructure as code, some of the things that Nick is going to talk about now are focused on making design basically more definable, repeatable, shareable, composable, executable, structured, and version control. So you're going to have the same sort of benefits from being able to define and collaborate on your design from the bottom up, as you increasingly have with the infrastructure and the application code. One of the concepts that is relevant here is this notion of a living style guide, which is a well-organized documentation of front-end code bases, a set of documents and specifications that can remain in constant sync with the code. They can be version controlled, as we talked about. They can be shareable. You can collaborate with the end user. You can collaborate with the DevOps team on this. And they are publicly available. This is the living style guide that Yelp developed. It's one of the more popular ones, and there's a whole slew of other ones that have been made publicly available. Some of the technologies that enable this sort of thing, I'd like to invite Nick to talk a little bit about those.
Sure. There are a number of different tools
and options out there for living style guides. Before we talk about those, though, I think an important point is that to also keep in mind when you're if you're trying to deal with this inherent conflict between design and development, and now in particular design, UX, and DevOps, is that our tools as developers have been rapidly changing, and we've been able over the years to pivot from tool to tool, technology to technology. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference with our lead designer, and we're at a wonderful breakfast, and I happened to make the mistake of saying to her, and by the way, for the record, I'm a front-end developer. I said to her, well, if you'd told me 5 years ago that I would no longer be using Dreamweaver as my main tool, I'd say you're nuts. Now I'm using, well, then Sublime. And then, of course, anyone from GitHub? Atom. Atom is now the next big tool. She looked at me like I had two heads and was ready to scream. The whole breakfast was ruined. Wow, what do you mean? She said, because the point I was trying to make is that designers have been using Photoshop. And as Mike said earlier, they design their comps and throw it over the wall and leave it up to the devs to build it. And then, God forbid, you're trying to fit into a life cycle for a product, and you got DevOps involved, and that's complete voodoo science for the designers. But there's a shift underway that's now happening. They're no longer starting to use Photoshop for their tools. So there's designers and UXers are also beginning to make this pivot using tools like Sketch. And in particular, something that I think a number of organizations, including ours, have seen that has really helped to bridge this divide is to empower the front-end developers or designers that can code. In particular, having someone who can own CSS architecture, because that's code. And that's what gets translated from the design and also performance into code that can then be reviewed, code review, version control, and moving through the DevOps pipeline. So to that end, we found that's been really important. And front-end developers that are forward-leaning and willing to learn or are using and passionate about tools like SAS. SAS in particular, so living style guides, if you have a style guide, in the past these were just static documents that encompass color patterns, color palettes, fonts, typography, maybe some of the design elements. But they were difficult to maintain because, the next change that comes along, the client wants another button style, the style guide is immediately out of date. So these living style guide tools like Now Style Sheets, KSS, Hologram, Style Down, etc., they leverage Ruby in particular and can feed through your SAS partials, your CSS essentially, and look for markdown that the developer has put in that essentially creates the styles that needs to be documented. The style guide that's outputted is essentially, these are mini sites, microsites that are easily readable. They serve as documentation that the entire team can then review. So an example of one that we've used heavily is Hologram. And Hologram is fantastic because anyone can go in here. So here's an example of form elements that we needed to communicate to the entire team. In this case, we were also working with a team of .NET developers who had no clue about HTML. And the front-end developers couldn't touch the markup whatsoever. And so you had this divide of the front-end developer saying, I need this CSS class. But then the back-end developer had to implement it. But they don't, they know .NET. They have no clue about HTML. So they were able to say, if you need this two text fields side by side, that's what it looks like, pulling straight from your CSS, and that's what the markup actually would look like. So if it looks like this, then you should be good to go. And then if anything breaks, you don't have to go back to the front-end developer. The project manager working with the DevOps team can then refer to this and see what may be broken. There might be something in the coding that could get destroyed. And there are different as well tools like Hologram give you as well ways to categorize the styles across your site. Really a fantastic fantastic tool. The other thing it does is it builds a common language in the team. So DevOps, you guys can now understand what the components are and how the site the user experience of the site is constructed. So here's an example of a screenshot of just a CSS, a SAS partial CSS, which at the top would include some markdown that the hologram, in this case, the hologram Ruby gem would parse through. It reads to generate that living style guide. And we saw an example of what that looks like. There's also style guides that are considered more like platforms. And these are considered also, in addition to serving as documentation for the designs and styles across one site, these are also design discovery tools. And the one that's growing in popularity is a tool called Pattern Lab, which, just like Hologram and KSS and these other living style guides, generates a microsite that then can be referred to by the entire team. And incidentally, one of the other advantages of these is this has the ability to keep the designers and the clients in check. So they stick with defined styles, and you don't wind up with a site that has 50,000 button styles. In other words, CSS that is getting rendered when it doesn't need to. Except if you're using, anyone use Bootstrap? Shame on you guys. We don't like Bootstrap. Bootstrap, by the way, is not 508 compliant out of the box, and it also forces the users to download about 300K of unnecessary junk. So it has a performance hit. But so Pattern Lab allows you to create your own Bootstrap for your site. And what's fantastic about tools like Pattern Lab is it forces everyone to start with your basic HTML elements. What do your ULs look like? What are your list items? What do your headers look like? Your font. How about any kind of speed or animation? This is just basic HTML animation. What does, for example, when we've designed in the past, our designers have never thought about what a marked element looks like. Well, there's an HTML tag for that, or a block quote. So it forces you to start from the inside, what they call the atomic side, and design inside out. This is part of a movement and a methodology called atomic design. When you have the basic elements of your page designed, these atoms, as they're called, are grouped together to create what are called molecules. So molecules, let's say, could also can include 2 or 3 atoms grouped together. So a thumbnail plus thumbnail plus paragraph. It could be a text input with a search button. Then, building out of that, you have your organisms, which could be something like your header or your footer. And mixed together, you have templates that are generated, which then turn into pages. The concept here is that your designers and front-end developers work and build these things in this static form. This uses PHP, Twig, JSON, I believe. There's a number of different tools that you can use for this to fit to whatever your product is. We do a lot of Drupal work, so we work with the Twig version of Pattern Lab. And then this, when they build this out, then you can apply it into your project. And in fact, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but there's also direct integrations with this with Docker.
Yeah, we'll pick up on that a little bit later.
So very very useful, the Pattern Lab and this methodology. And again, though Pattern Lab doesn't show you the code and does not show that as a reference, it's excellent for products that are continuously under an agile UX methodology that continually need to be revised and updated and designed. And so you wind up coming up with a pattern library for your tool. And your clients are able to look at this and conceptually think of a page. And instead of having to redesign every page or create wireframes for new pages, they can say, well, on this new page you're creating, I want this element and this element and this element. And it creates that a canonical reference. And also helps for testing, because anyone can, again, refer back to this tool and refer it against something that someone may consider to be broken on your site when an update has been completed. There are also a number of different style guides that are out there and other sort of frameworks, including Google Material Design. Twitter Bootstrap is another. There's Zerb Foundation. They tend to be bloated and have unnecessary code, but they're great for prototyping, of course, if you don't have a designer or front-end developer on your team. It's important, though, as I said earlier, having a front-end developer as part of your team, a front-end developer or front-end development team that is empowered, because essentially they're the ones that have to they're the ones in between the designers and DevOps. They have to architect out the design in a way that can be reviewed, that can be part of the code base. So there are a number of different CSS architecture methodologies that are absolutely critical for this type of process. Object-oriented CSS, SMAX, and BEM, which have gained in popularity. It's vital. What these methodologies and what these architectures do is they allow the designers to start thinking about designing with intention. And they think about, instead of having CSS classes that have names that are gibberish or just random numbers, these methodologies force you to think about the purpose of these elements on the page, the designed elements. And it makes you also think about sort of the tone of your site, any variants that also you may need. And, if there's, say, any kind of toggling with JavaScript or interactivity with JavaScript, it's absolutely critical. And to that end, front-end developers are using now a number of different automation tools, task runners like Grunt and Gulp, bundlers, and so forth, which have really helped to also bridge this divide, in particular between front-end development and DevOps. And what we're finding on our team is that the biggest proponents and the biggest cheerleaders of DevOps in our team are the front-end developers. And they're the ones that are actually going out to our clients and evangelizing the importance of DevOps, so that we can then communicate back to the client, well, you can't just go in and FTP the change up to the live site. There is a process that we now need to follow.
So thank you very much, Nick. So as Nick was saying, what this allows us to do in a certain way is to integrate the whole design process in our CI environment. And part of the reason why Nick was saying the design team becomes such, the UX team becomes such advocates for DevOps is because, as we'll see briefly, this helps us to include design and front-end development effectively in the feedback cycle, which is so key to DevOps. So we heard about the importance earlier about gathering performance metrics. This will allow us to gather those performance metrics in a shareable and an actionable way. So we can go back and not only on the back end figuring out how many more EC2 instances we need or how we can more efficiently provision those, but also how we can use this more effectively from a user experience standpoint, because front-end development is becoming increasingly important in terms of overall website performance. So being able to take that performance data back to the design and UX team and allow them to re-architect the way in which the front end is developed and gaining this, the benefits on the front end, along with the benefits as you do from a more efficiency in working together with the back end and the rest of the infrastructure. Something else to consider, is that when you start looking about integrating design and DevOps, you're struck with the fact that you need to start considering DevOps in the context of other types of media. I, prior to becoming involved in DevOps back in the early 2000s, was actually heavily involved in the usability movement and user-centered design. And around back then, there was this realization that doing a high-fidelity mock-up of a design in Photoshop and building the application from that standpoint was often detrimental from the discovery standpoint. And from the learning, from the standpoint of learning, which is so essential to the DevOps. And along with this idea is the notion that it often helps to start with a very low fidelity medium, such as paper, and architecting out your design using paper prototyping, and then building your infrastructure, your information architecture through wireframes, and using the creativity of paper before you create too high fidelity design, which has actually been shown to have some detriments. So back in the early 2000s, this was an article that discussed the problems with selling high fidelity prototypes to VCs. There's this, let's build something that's going to get us funded, and then we'll fix the design later on in a way that actually achieves the needs of the user. What happens is someone buys into that and they take on a life of their own. And it becomes hard to throw away the prototype. It creates a false sense of agility, and in the long run, limits your ability to, as Nick was saying, learn and pivot based on the discovery process. So Nordstrom is one of the stars, if you will, of agile UX and revolutionary design. And what they've basically done with their innovation lab, there's a series of videos on YouTube that you can review, is bring DevOps into the store. And to include paper prototyping in the product development and delivery cycle. Using techniques such as A/B testing, which has become key. Again, being able to make the minimal type of change to be able to quickly evaluate, A versus B. Many of us have had the experience of having the optometrist saying, tell us, do you prefer A versus B? Often it's difficult for the user to discriminate if they have too many options. So if we can limit that to the smallest possible option, and we can, pivot. Looking at some of the other organizations that are prominent in DevOps and how they've used some of the agile design concepts we've looked at to improve the user experience. Amazon and Netflix do a lot of A/B testing as well. Toyota is another company that, interestingly enough, includes paper heavily in their design and development process. They have a lot of reliance on paper, but they developed an adaptive system that, through integrative leadership, allows them to bring together the disparate teams and serve the end needs of the user most effectively. This sort of thinking and integrative leadership is well summarized in a book that was developed by Rienerstein that's become very popular in the last couple of years. And it's a focus on viewing the design process, the development process, and the overall context of the effective organization. And the idea here is that, in DevOps, we're often focused on being able to keep things predictable and eliminating variability. And the concept that this book makes prominent is the fact that in product development and creativity, you generally want to be able to benefit from variation rather than eliminating it. And what you need to do is to work to have the different processes within the organization in sync so that you can most effectively minimize the waste and the development in progress. Sometimes that will involve doing paper on one side of, in one team while you're all digital in the other team. And by having that UX factor, that design experience within the purview of DevOps, at least within the realm of shared understanding, we can actually most effectively serve the need of the user. So,
thank you.
That's it.
All right, thanks very much. Okay, so we are now up to our Ignites, and I need a couple of volunteers. As you learned yesterday, Ignite is a very special format. There are 20 slides that auto-advance every 15 seconds, so it's a 5-minute talk. The presenter has no control over their slides. We are going to run one session of what is called Ignite Karaoke today. Here's how Ignite Karaoke works. We have selected 20 slides. They will auto-advance every 15 seconds. And we need 4, James, how many volunteers? 4 or 5? 5 volunteers, we need 4 slides each. We need 5 volunteers. You will do 4 slides each, and they will auto-advance every 15 seconds. Wow, now we have more than 4. All right, if you want to volunteer, I'd like you just to stand up. Okay, let's see. We have 1, 2. Mike, you're going to do that too? No, you're standing up. It's cool, Mike. You can stand up. All right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people that. Can you add just 4 more slides?
Sorry. Oh, do we? I don't have 4. Sorry.
No, Leon already gave an Ignite. He's sitting down. No, so that's good. We have 3, 4 people. 4 is what you need.
5 people, 4 slides each.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many? You need 1 more person. Not Leon. He already gave an Ignite. Greg, you're giving an Ignite. You can't do that. All right, Mark's going to do it. Great. We have 5 people. So those of you that are volunteering now that you're standing, you can move over here and queue up with us. And James is just going to line everybody up. Also, I get to give an Ignite, so I hope that you'll give me a warm welcome when I do. And let's give a quick round of applause in advance for everyone that's about to give an Ignite. Just get them excited. This is going to go great. All right. First one up.
Let me do an introduction.
All right, great.
All right, first we have Worth Becker talking about versioning machine images. So let us know when you're ready.
You go ahead. My name is Worth. I'm a functional programmer, neckbeard, closure guy. So I'm going to talk to you about immutability and versioning machine images like your software. One thing that we all really don't like is pager duty, not the company or the vendor. But I mean, no one likes getting woken up at 3 a.m. because something happened to change in production that caused an outage. So we have some tools to help us with that, things like infrastructure as code, Mario Kart, and immutable infrastructure. And so, right, we don't want anything to be changing in production. We don't want to be installing Yum updates or doing anything like that in a production environment. We want to know what's running out there works. And so that's where versions help us. But obviously, look, I just said don't do Yum updates, but you do maybe update security things. You know, we're not purists about this. You know, we make concessions. But the idea is let's control what goes on that machine as much as possible and avoid mutation. And the other thing is runtime configuration. If you're using AWS CloudFormation, you might be creating a resource at runtime and then injecting it into your launch config. You're mutating state. Look, we have to do it. So, you know, we try to minimize these things. So there's good things about images, right? We can tightly couple them to go to stage, QA, prod, and know that it went through the life cycle just like our software. And you can roll them back when you realize something is screwed up in production, because sometimes we don't always know things are bad until they're in prod. And obviously, infrastructure as code means if it's code, I can test it. So I should be able to know exactly what's on that machine at any given time. So that helps us, right? There we go. All right. So what I do is, you know, we build machine images daily, so we have it on cron job. But you could do it like on a commit to your like chef repo or whatever you're doing. The idea here is you're constantly building AMIs or machine images. And there's a reason for that, mainly because we put timestamps at the end of our version strings for stuff. So like you look at the Kafka thing. But if you don't want to do the timestamp thing, you can just use a typical semantic versioning string there. So all right, I'm Seth now, and we're going to talk about how we do this in AWS. Warning, there is code ahead. Don't worry about it too much. We have like a GitHub link. It'll be at the last slide too. So yeah, you don't have to read code in 15 seconds. It's going to be okay. I'll get ahead of this slide because I want to talk about Chef Solo and why we use it. Chef Solo allows us to bake all the configuration into the machine image at the time we create that image. We're not pulling things from NPM or doing anything like that because NPM goes down, and then we're trying to scale, and we're like, what happened? And that's not fun, right? Yeah, these are the tools we use. Packer's awesome, CloudFormation, Lambda. You guys are probably all familiar with it. So we build a ton of AMIs. We've even hit the AMI limit of 10,000 before, which we got a funny email from Amazon. So there's a tool called Simian Army with Janitor Monkey. It'll help you clean all that stuff up, old AMIs. And so AMI IDs suck, right? Because they're not human readable. We can't remember them, and so they don't really provide any use for us. So we want we want some a better way to like reference AMIs. And so Packer comes in here. It runs our chef recipes, and then we create a tag for that AMI that's the node name and the version string. So now we have an image stored in our EC2 account, when we start in EC2, and it's got a tag. And so here's like an AMS, a Lambda function we have in CloudFormation. JavaScript's not there, so you have to go to GitHub. But this is what we do to look up an AMI in CloudFormation, right? So in another template, you'll define a custom resource that references that Lambda function. The outputs of it are the ID of the AMI, and you'll see that in the usage. So in our launch config, we just get the ID attribute out of that custom resource, and we never had to remember an AMI ID. Thank you. So changing versions, right? So when we create a resource, that version number is going to be locked the time that resource is created. So you might have like a stack parameter that's a version string. You just bump that version, cause the resource to update, and that will bump your version. And the other cool thing about Packer is like, hey, I want to create an ISO that's going to match exactly what's in my production environment. So now you can give your developers like an ISO, it's like, hey, this is an exact copy of what we're running in prod, which is awesome. Yeah, so if you guys want to talk more about this, maybe we could do a little open session later. Anyway, I'm Worth, and yeah, immutability.
All right, next up we have Gene Gottimer. He's going to talk about security tools on the pipeline. Let us know when you're ready.
All right, so I'm going to talk about getting some open source security tools into your pipeline, but it's really not so much about the tools as it is about the process. Looking for places and opportunities to do security testing. Part of it is we're looking to build out a pipeline that gives us a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different types of testing. And at each stage, we want to do just enough of each type of testing so that we know that further testing is worthwhile. So we want to do the easy stuff first, the stuff that's going to catch the most. That goes for whether we're doing quality checks or for security checks. We want to know that we're doing the best thing that we can do right now. So start with your source code, right? Reduce your code footprint. Make your attack surface less. If you're using something like Apache Maven, there's all sorts of tools to look at your dependencies. Make sure you get rid of any libraries you're not really using. Once you get rid of those libraries, use OWASP dependency check. That'll give you an opportunity to check the libraries that you are using to see if they have any known vulnerabilities. And it works for a bunch of different languages. Quality code is easier to secure than poor quality code. Make sure you're using static analysis to keep your code clean. Part of security is knowing what inputs are going to produce what outputs. What's the behavior going to be? Also, make sure your code is tested. Not just did the code run while I was running my unit test, but actually tested. Mutation testing tools like PyTest and Ninja Turtles can tell you, are you really doing any valuable testing on your code? Your regular testing tools like Selenium, functional testing, can do a lot of security testing as long as you're doing tests that are looking at what types of testing or what types of things can my users not do or should not be able to do. An admin can see this type of menu, a regular user can't. While you're doing those tests, run them through a passive proxy like OWASP Zap. Make sure you're doing some extra security testing just while you're doing your regular functional tests, just to get the traffic through there. Make sure you have repeatable, reliable deployments. Chef, Ansible, Puppet, whatever you're using to make sure your tests are good, or your deploys are repeatable. That way you can do your type of testing at any point in the pipeline in any environment. You don't have to wait until you get to your last stage. Also, Chef's Inspect. That can be used to do your audits. Now, it may not replace your official audit, but it can be used so that you can you can do an audit first and know that when you send it to the official audit, you have confidence it's going to pass. OpenSCAP. Scan your baselines before and after you do your deploys. Know that you're not building on an insecure foundation, but also that you're not breaking anything when you do your deploys. If you're using a web server or an application server, scan that. Make sure that's configured right. NICTO2 is good for scanning web servers to make sure they're configured right so they're not leaking information, making sure everything's set up right so that you're not breaking it just by the configuration itself. Of course, scanning the web app itself is important. W3AF, Wikipedia, there's tons of tools out there. They usually take a lot longer than some of the tools I've mentioned up to this point. So they have to happen a little bit later in the pipeline so that you're not slowing things down to get them done. Once things are set up, don't forget about the database. SQL Map is a great tool for looking at SQL injection through the web app. So it's after things are deployed, can I exploit the database through the web application itself? Keep your packages up to date. Okay, some of these aren't open source, but keep all your packages up to date just like you keep your libraries up to date. Also, consider subscribing to the US CERT Weekly Vulnerability Summary just so you know what vulnerabilities are coming out each week so you stay informed. Scan all the systems. Don't forget the infrastructure. Make sure you're scanning the systems with something like OpenVAS and also using something like Nmap to look for unexpected open ports or unexpected systems on your network. Everyone's heard about the Simian Army. Prepare for failure. There's no way you're going to recover gracefully from a failure if you haven't practiced it. When it's in production and you're under the gun, you are not going to be at your best. Make sure it's something you've practiced. Also, there's no such thing in the cloud as just a dev system, so you don't need to secure it. Secure everything. Use things like fail to ban to protect against brute force attacks, aid to look for intrusion detection, look for files being modified unexpectedly. Also, continuously improve. Don't expect ever to be perfectly secure. A little bit better is still better. Keep improving, use continuous improvement, keep looking at what you can do, look for new opportunities to add more testing, more security testing to your system. And if you're looking for inspiration on tools or pre-installed tools to play with, think about downloading Kali Linux, hundreds of tools that you can play with. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Greg. Next up we have Greg Ellen. He's going to talk about compliance automation. Let us know when you're ready, Greg.
You want to give me some?
Let us know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
Go ahead and you can hit escape and restart it.
Okay, I'm Greg Ellen. I used to be a Govy, and now I'm doing a startup called GovReady, and I'm here to talk about how to automate compliance paperwork if you're not Chuck Norris. So first, I'd like to give a big thank you for DevOps Days for teaching me how to automate. It's helped me so much. I also want to thank you, Chuck Norris, for letting me live. Thank you, Chuck. Chuck Norris doesn't need to audit. His servers just comply. But for the rest of us, we have a problem. Everything has gotten faster, but our compliance and auditing is still slow and manual because we're using Word documents. And we really need to fix this. We fix this by preparing paperwork as part of our pipeline. And by the way, what's Chuck Norris's method of attack? Continuous delivery. So we begin with Sprint. So Chuck Norris wins Scrum because Chuck Norris has no blockers. What we need to do is use something like issue packs, which will give you a bunch of issues and stick them, your compliance issues, into your backlog along with everything else. Now, build a Docker scanning instance in your pipeline so you scan with every build. Now, Chuck Norris doesn't use Docker because nothing contains Chuck Norris. I want to repeat this. Security, let your developers scan. There's some great tools out there, like were mentioned, OpenSCAP, Inspect, Chef Audit, and GovReady. To Chuck Norris, this won't make a difference because everything contains a vulnerability. Now, Chuck Norris's servers never go down, they throw down. But you need to run penetration tests, and you can do that as part of your automating test with Gauntlet or OWASP Zap. Now, this is audience participation. When I point, Chuck Norris only uses Ansible, Chef, or Salt because Chuck Norris is nobody's puppet. All right, Chuck Norris replaces XML with Yark, yet another roundhouse kick. For the rest of us, we're going to use Open Control to replace Word docs with YAML for our system security plans. This is a new community that's popping up. The benefit here is we get digital system security plans that live in our repositories. By the way, Netflix recently replaced Chaos Monkey with Chuck Norris. All right, if you treat your servers like pets, Chuck Norris will kill them. So stop treating your documents like pet. Create them in YAML, put them in documents, and make them reusable. And Open Control will help you do that. Now, Chuck Norris doesn't have to do pager duty. All right, for the rest of us, here's an example. We want to talk about our components and how our components actually do our controls and specify that inside of the YAML. If we do it, we now have a pipeline for our paperwork that's parallel to our pipeline for building our systems. And we can generate the end documents starting with YAML in whatever format we want, from Git books to Word documents. And Chuck Norris is the reason kernels panic. The Open Control community, it's open source. It's got some great people in it. It is real. It's happening. Money's being spent. It doesn't matter to Chuck Norris because the only shell Chuck Norris uses is bash. All right, we're coming to the end. Lastly, you have to monitor your supply chains the same way you monitor commits. And you need to start looking at tools like Sonatype and Ion Channel for doing that, or you could just include Chuck Norris in your code base and your process can never be killed. All right, so how to get started. When you go back to your office, identify the points of contact that are responsible for components that make up your systems, and then you're going to find the controls inside of those components. However, don't track it in a directory named Chuck Norris. You can't / Chuck Norris and live. Chuck Norris's Hello World app was kill 9. All right, I want you to pick one of these apps that you're going to go home and incorporate. So everybody stand up. You're going to take a pledge. Stand up with me quickly. Stand up. I pledge DevOps Days to make, say it, one of these tools you're going to use. Say it. All right, part of my paperwork pipeline. And Chuck Norris is watching if you don't. Okay, we can't all be Chuck Norris, but when we automate, Chuck Norris approves. Thank you very much.
All right, nice job, Greg. Next up, we have Rajiv Kadiyam going to talk about OWASP.
It's a tough act to follow.
Let us know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Hey, I'm Rajiv Kadiyam. I run the technology strategy at eGlobal Tech. I'm going to be talking about automating OWASP tests as part of your CI/CD process. We talked a lot about security vulnerability. Federal agencies and other organizations have an ongoing challenge of cybersecurity issues, and they need to be able to get more and more secure software and not necessarily more security software. So if you watched SNL and a geek like me, you may understand this joke. Otherwise, we'll keep moving on. Thank you, Bruce Dickinson. So a lot of security statistical reports have released the fact that there are a lot of vulnerabilities in websites and web applications today that need to be resolved. One of the core common findings is that, okay, help me find these issues sooner in the process so that I can remediate them. I'm pretty sure everyone knows what OWASP is. It's an open source body that promotes transparency and visibility on security vulnerability issues. And they have the top 10 security flaws and other projects. If you take an agile development process, it seems to be very disconnected with the security penetration testing that's happening way late in the process. Developers don't get visibility to those issues until right at the end, and they get frustrated. They're not able to. They're not having enough time to fix those issues. Sure, static code scanning is helpful, but it's not nearly sufficient. You need to be able to truly get to the bottom of the problem sooner than later. And the cost for remediation in this environment, including a lot of people, like operations and agile teams and cybersecurity, tends to be really compounded. So your remediation cost is going up. How can we, and vulnerabilities leak into the production. So how can we fix this problem, right? That's what we're going to talk about. You need to integrate and automate. So you need to be able to push the security penetration testing process more left of the process so that you can get a build quality report that actually clearly tells you what those issues are, so the developer has a much more richer experience of what those issues are and can proactively fix it. SPL is our product that we built at EGT Labs. It'll show you how we are integrating some of the security penetration tools as part of the CI/CD pipeline, producing this rich report in Jenkins so the developer can iteratively go through the process. So this truly is like baking security by design. And we can also enable like the FISMA NIST compliance automation as well as part of this toolkit. So we'll walk through a quick set of screenshots that demonstrates SPL. We'll take a sample application. This is the Budget Plus application. We've added some security vulnerabilities to it. You can see a very simple SQL statement. Someone decided to concatenate it, and that's obviously going to be vulnerable for exploitation. We'll take it through the continuous integration process. You check in the code. Jenkins kicks in. We'll deploy a Vagrant VM, and OWASP Zap will run against it, and then produce a vulnerability report within Jenkins itself, so that you're not going to another web UI or whatever to find out this information. So you'll see a list of the vulnerabilities that has been discovered, what those issues are. You can drill down to one of those specific issues, like a SQL injection, and actually get an insight of what those endpoints are that are vulnerable, and you have this aha moment, like, okay, if I can figure out where it is in the pipeline, now I can go and fix the code and run it through the process again. So this is like the aha moment for the developer, and they have other insights. But so they, change the SQL statement to a more prepared statement, have parameterized queries, check in the code, and run it through the continuous integration process. And within the next 5 to 6 minutes, a new report gets generated in Jenkins, and voila, that issue is remediated. So you still have a few more issues, but then you can go through this process in an iterative and incremental manner, so you see some real progress. This tool was implemented with 100% open source tool, so we glued OWASP, ZAP, and Gauntlet together. We are using Jenkins as the CI/CD pipeline, but we can very easily work with Bamboo or any of your Puppet infrastructures that you may already have. So there's nothing precluding it. What do you get out of this? You have a clear continuous visibility in all of these issues. You are saving a lot of time and money, and you're eliminating the risk of some SQL injection issue kind of creeping into production as part of your development process. We are looking to integrate this with Jenkins 2 and maybe SonarQube as well, add a lot more capabilities to the automation process, not just stop with security vulnerability testing, but also Section 508 and other aspects as well. If you have any comments, please email us to EGT Labs. Finally, I'd like to cite that if you'd like to see a live demo recording of SPL, you can stop by our booth, and we'll have some of our developers who can talk with you. Don't stop innovating. Keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we have this guy. I'm not sure who he is, but he's going to do a talk about sadness.
It is. It's very sad.
Morbid.
It's sad.
Let us know when you're ready.
I'm ready when you are. So it's been a wonderful DevOps days, and I'm sorry to report that DevOps is dead. It's been 7 years of unicorns and magic, but it's time to move on. DevOps is no longer with us. But before we talk about moving on, let's look back on the life of DevOps, if you will. So DevOps started at an open space session that was about agile infrastructure. And it was started when people thought agile infrastructure meant using Velcro wire ties instead of zip ties in your data center. That meant agile infrastructure. That's what we were talking about. And then along came the cloud. And now, all of a sudden, we had this amazing ability to spin up unlimited capacity. And it was beautiful. Not only was it beautiful in that we could just turn on and off servers, but also our developers could just run those things in the cloud. They didn't even have to talk to operations. It was just like Anthrax when they discovered that they could sing Public Enemy's Bring the Noise, and they didn't even need the rappers there. So it's like punk rock playing a hip-hop song. It's kind of good. It's really good, but it's not really quite right. We also had operators developing. We have our operators now have to help those folks in the cloud. When we put Public Enemy and Anthrax together, that's when we get true DevOps, when they cover that song together. It's super amazing. And also, DevOps is a true operations organization. Look at Flava Flav. He's timing everything. He's getting all the metrics from the Flava Flav. He's my man. All right, but DevOps isn't enough. Things break. So we need QA to come and help us along with this process. So forget the term DevOps. It's now Dev QA Ops. We cannot forget those other departments. So Dev QA Ops is where it's at. But what about the security folks? Shit. All right, DevSec QA Ops. That's what we'll call it. It'll be DevSec QA Ops so that we can embrace security. Security is a real thing. Hit the button, make it DevSec QA Ops. But I think there's more. What about the enterprise? What about the enterprise? It moves so slow. They are not the unicorns. They are the donkeys, but they are so strong and powerful. But it must be different. So it is now Enterprise Dev QA Ops. I told you, DevOps is dead. Oh, man, we can now automate our network gear. What about the net team? All right, it's Enterprise DevSec Net QA Ops. You see what I'm saying? DevOps is totally dead. Okay, what's next? What do you think might be next? I'm not sure. We can't forget about the money. We have to get paid. DevOps is great in open source, but getting paid is also really good. Look at Betsy's talk. How do we make sure that we're not spending too much on our cloud? Bring in the finance teams. So now it's Enterprise Dev Fin Sec Net QA Ops. But what about the government? Look, we're here in DC. The government can do DevOps. Also, what about governance of our things? The government, the governance. Enterprise Dev, FinSec, Net, QA, GovOps. Are you with me? And speaking of compliance, the good thing is we get another thing. We can bring in compliance, but we can just still call it Gov. It can be government or governance. So our name is still the same. Enterprise Dev, FinSec, Net, QA, GovOps. But honestly, DevOps, we talk about sharing, and we talk about training one another, cross-training. You can't cross-train one another and move to different departments without human resources involved, so they've got to be part of this party. Enterprise Dev, HR, FinSec, Net, QA, GovOps. But what about those rugged folks? Security isn't enough. We need rugged systems. That's what's going to win the day. So rugged enterprise dev, HR, fin, sec, net, QA, gov, ops. Have we forgotten anyone? We have. Open source, we got to get our legal department to sign off on both the use of open source, and also we should be contributing back to open source. All right, rugged enterprise dev, legal, HR, fin, sec, net, QA, gov, ops. What do you think? Oh, shit, we forgot the customer, the one that we're doing all of this for. What were we thinking? All right, they must be included. Rugged enterprise, dev, legal, HR, fin, sec, net, QA, gov, cust, ops. What is this? What do you call this? It's not a shaflower. It's a fucking cake. And when you eat it, it tastes delicious. We don't make up stupid names for this thing. It's just a cake. There's raspberries on it. We don't have to list all of the ingredients. When we say DevOps, this is what we mean. It is a cultural and professional movement focused on how we build and operate high-velocity organizations born from the experiences of its practitioners. You do not fix an organization by focusing exclusively on 2 departments. You also do not need to add every other acronym or abbreviation for your department into the word DevOps. It means all of us. This tent is big enough for all of us. We all practice it. We are all well-connected specialists. Thank you.
All right, so next up we have our Ignite karaoke. So I want to ask the 5 participants to line up at the stage. This is going to move really quickly. So each of you are going to get 4 slides, and after your 4th slide, a prompt will appear for the next speaker. And at that time, just please hand off your microphone to the next speaker, and the slides will continue advancing. They have not seen these slides at all. These slides have no words. They're all pictures. And if you see them stutter or stall, we would like some audience participation. So if you see something there that you can shout out, some concept, some topic, please do so. We're going to try to keep everything here DevOps focused. These slides could take you very dark places, but we want we would like them to stay within the realm of DevOps. So please keep that in mind. So go ahead and take a. Actually, yeah. Why don't you guys line up right by the stairs? I'll go up there. Yeah. That works. Yeah.
Hello?
You ready?
Yes. Hi, I'm Billy Pogge.
So you can go ahead and hit space to skip that first one.
And I need to tell you about my history and how far I've come. You can see that as I started out, it was a bit of a move from my first apartment. We drove quite quickly across the country, getting from New York into, yes. How quickly I got here is rather notorious. Why I drove like that, I think you can understand, is we had to adapt in a DevOps mentality. We had to move fast in an uncomfortable way. So fast that one does not simply move that fast. I understand that, yes, you can't call it out, and everything is attributable in DevOps, so you have to keep moving. I understand in that, yes. It's a fusion, really, of the best aspects that we've come to enjoy, both man, machine, and animal. I think you can recognize the machine and the man there. That's me on the right.
Hi, everyone. Well, clearly I have some dark things to say about DevOps, like when everything burns down. Well, I actually kind of enjoy it, as you can see. I like to watch the carnage unfold, watch all the pagers go off. I laugh when that happens Because look, I'm like Tom Cruise. I'm like, I know all better than you. I've got the Scientology thing going on, and clearly my evolution of 5 million years has taken me to a great DevOps, except when I need to run away. And just like this girl who's holding a microphone, she's got lots of things to run away from, like disasters, and she needs to recover. The way I like to recover is with my Barbie dolls. This is how I console myself afterwards. I play with the Barbie dolls, and I learn from my mistakes by putting unicorn horns on my Barbie dolls. Thank you.
Oh boy. Cats. The internet is for cats, which is why we must DevOps quickly so that we can get cat pictures to our customers as quickly as possible in a secure manner, especially when those cats have cute human noses and are drinking coffee. Because coffee is also important to DevOps, because if we are not coffee fueled, well, then we spill bran flakes all over the place, and that's usually what happens in production, is someone who is not coffee fueled trying to get cat pictures out to our customers winds up doing something in production that they're not supposed to do. So that's why we wind up having to delete cookies. Because they're stuck in our browser history, and then everyone knows that browser histories have to be deleted as quickly as possible. No one wants anything in their browser history that really needs to stick around, which is why the best thing you can possibly do is rapid delivery. In small chunks, with large frameworks. And these sorts of rapid delivery systems are the key to successful DevOps environments. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about blameless postmortems. Obviously, everyone wants to blame the kid here, but you weren't there. You don't know what happened. You can't blame the kid. You can't blame anybody. The root cause is never a person, unless it's Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan is the root cause of everything. Sorry, Chuck Norris. And if Hulk Hogan's suing you, you can expect to lose, just like Gawker did. It was really tragic. So this is what you have to do when you lose to Hulk Hogan. You have to wear the pizza of shame around your head. It's pepperoni pizza. I love pepperoni pizza, but not as a hat. It just doesn't work, especially if you're a cat, because cats don't wear hats anyway. But enough silliness. Let's hand it off to this guy.
All right, let's wrap this up. Listen, when we're doing DevOps, sometimes you got to ride a bitch's back like Yoda and Luke. It's the only way that you can really work together. This is how you get the DevOps force. It's how you became a team. It's how you know that you can do, not just try. Because frankly, we make the best clouds. We do DevOps. We have all the best tools. We have all the best buzzwords. We do all the best things. Nobody can argue with that because we make everybody else rich. And that's what really DevOps is about. Otherwise, this is how we feel when you tell us that our DevOps is not important and that we should just work in our silos and be by ourselves. We lose our minds because, frankly, I don't want to fill in that ticket because I just need the storage and I need it now. And these guys really want me to not bumble around. We want to be successful. As fun as it is to watch somebody suffer and burn through trying to find that one bug that they wrote while drinking whiskey, never did it. It's entertaining, but frankly, we've got to do better.
All right, give it up for your Ignite speakers and your Ignite karaoke speakers.
All right, that was awesome. That was really good. So the next time you're at a conference and they do Ignite karaoke, who's going to participate? All right. That'll be much easier next year. Also, folks from Baltimore, I think we're going to do Ignite karaoke up there. What do you think? Okay, great. So next up, it's time for us to talk about what we're going to talk about this afternoon. So once again, I'll walk you through it really quickly. But we have a blank schedule over here for tomorrow, for this afternoon. We have no idea what our topics are going to be. It's over to you now. It's up to you to help us understand and decide what our topics will be for this afternoon. So we have Post-its. Do we have Post-its? All right, we have Post-its. Are they over there? There are definitely some Post-its. And what you should do if you have an idea, same thing as yesterday. We are going to prepare prepare your topic. The way that you prepare your topic, and let me just walk through it one more time. The rules of who's allowed to propose the topic. Everyone in this room is allowed to propose the topic. Everyone in this room is encouraged to propose the topic. And what you should do is only propose a topic that you are passionate enough about to start a conversation. So you have to have enough passion about that topic to start a conversation. That's the only rule. You're going to come up, get in a line. We're going to give you 15 seconds to describe your topic. You'll write it down on the Post-it. You'll slap it on the wall. After everyone has proposed their topics, and if you want to queue up while I'm speaking, you're welcome to do so. You can start the line now, even as the Post-its are making their way there. Once everyone has posted their things, we'll then do voting. And the way that you vote is you have 3 dots, and you may place them on any combination of up to 3 Post-its, and then we will organize into a schedule. So we have the next, what time is it? We have the next half an hour or so to get that done, 20 minutes. We have 25 minutes to get that done, and then lunch starts at 1 o'clock. I do want to say some quick words about lunch while folks are queuing up here. You may have seen how they've set up the tables today. We're actually going to not have 1 line going to lunch. We're going to have 4 lines going to lunch. So it should be much easier to get through that line today. One line will start sort of here, and one on the far side where the registration tables are. Another line here, and another line back by where the T-shirt tables were. And you're going to kind of converge towards the center as you pick up your food, and then go eat. We did get, our order was served again for another beautiful day of weather. So again, I'd encourage you to eat outside if you like, get some of that vitamin D with your lunch, have great conversations and so forth. All right, looks like we've got a good queue of folks here lined up with some topics. So I'm going to hand off the mic to Peter, who's going to give us our first couple.
I'm Peter Burkholder. I have a topic of disaster recovery. Disaster recovery for your career. If you are anticipating or not anticipating a downturn or a reorg, what are you doing now to think about your future, or what have you learned from past experiences? Let's get together and talk about that. I may be doing a Arrested DevOps podcast on this subject later in the summer, so I'd like to know what people have to say.
Come on up. All right.
Alan Koch with ASPE Training. DevSecOps. Continuous security testing. How do we get our security people on board?
Hi, I'm Jason Hofferly, and after a couple conversations at happy hour last night, it was suggested that we might have a few people that would want to talk about PowerShell, desired state configuration, and I'd be interested in hearing how some folks are using it in their environments to glue their pipeline together.
Will there be whiskey?
Possibly.
The short guy, hey. I'm interested in talking about DevOps with extremely small teams, like 3 to 5 people.
There's been some great talking about including security and DevOps and compliance. So anyone who's interested in helping organize a compliance camp where we'll talk about compliance as code, that will be the session that I'd like to run.
When your rockstar cheetah is leaving for, say, Google, what do you do? How do you manage the DevOps knowledge transfer?
I wrote DevOps as a service versus DevOps as a culture here, but what I really like to talk about is the DevOps silo and how to break out of it, because it's only the other guys who are in silos, right? Never us. Well, if you're a DevOps person or on a DevOps team and you're responsible for providing DevOps services to the entire company, but you're having a hard time providing those services at the rate that your internal customers need, maybe you're in a silo. So let's talk about how we can be more cross-functional and collaborate better, and maybe about what some of the compromises that may require. So join us for that.
Hi, I'm Alan Kraft with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. I'm proposing a conversation on DevOps and the learning organization.
Hello, we're interested in talking about never-ending builds, strategies for limiting or choosing browser-based tests in a pipeline.
Wanted to talk about automating the conversion of your legacy EJB services to REST in the preparation to go to the cloud.
I'd like to talk about automation and cybersecurity policy in highly regulated organizations.
I would like to talk about the fact that although this conference has no doubt done a lot to reach out to a very broad audience, I think we can always do better. So I'd like to talk about finding 2 or 3 specific things we can do to better reach out to people and make the attendees and speakers more diverse. So a lot of people look like me with, more or less hair, but we can broaden that a bit more. Thanks.
I'd like to talk about going from getting something barely working to understanding how it works when default configurations and strangers on Stack Overflow won't cut it.
Hi, my name's Josh, and I'd like to start a discussion about burnout, how it happens, and how to avoid it.
I would like to understand what makes a good DevOps consultant.
Would like to discuss managing secrets in a DevOps pipeline.
I'd like to discuss how we can speed up software acquisitions so that when we find a great new tool that would fit in the pipeline or fulfill a need, we can get it faster and bring it in the federal space.
If you're interested in visualizing metrics, how to use it to make better decisions and be more informed about where you're at. Thoughts?
So while chaos is good, is there any way to standardize DevOps in terms of tools, processes, and people? I'm going to say, do we need a DevOps manifesto? And ultimately, do we really need to standardize?
All right, I have 2 suggestions. They say write what you know. So my first suggestion is learning and training in enterprise IT. What's wrong, what's right, and what is needed. And then second, unrelated idea, what are the biggest challenges to adopting DevOps practices in government agencies?
And my topic is addressing accountability and security operations and configuration management enforcement in a DevOps environment.
If you're really new with DevOps and don't know a lot of the buzzwords and products that you've heard so much about here, I'm proposing a DevOps 101, which is very it's kind of meta and very what are all these services that we've heard about and how can we start using them if you're not?
I'm proposing using effective problem management to build momentum or sell DevOps.
Any other topics? All right. So for the next whatever, we have time for you to vote. The food is probably out. I see with my eye that the food must be out by now. I have no idea, but well, you'll find out soon enough. So before you eat, it's probably a good idea, remember we're embracing the chaos at the board. Make your votes on the topics that you'd like, and then we'll move. What's that? Yes, you get 3 votes, 3 votes each. Use them as you like. Yes. Also, while you're walking towards the board, but still hearing my voice, you will soon be receiving an email with a survey asking you for feedback on this conference. We would really appreciate you taking the 3 minutes to fill that out. I will remind you of that later also.
If you were an Ignite speaker, come see me so I can give you your swag bag. So Ignite speakers, come seek out James and you'll get your swag bag. That is the scheduled speakers, not the karaoke speakers. Sorry, guys.
No, we have something for the karaoke
Oh, we
speakers.
have something for the karaoke speakers. Okay. Karaoke speakers get something, too. Meet me by the corner.